Chapter 730. Lu Xiaoyi arrived 2 days early. If he arrived too early, it would be a bit conspicuous. His current status was that of a free and unfettered wanderer's disciple. As a disciple of a large sect, he could not be too impatient. If it was too late, it would not be good for observation. 2 days was just right. As soon as he arrived, he discovered something that made him very surprised. It was a feeling that he had not experienced for a long time. There was only one intersection in Guangqing Palace, and in front of this intersection, cultivators were actually lining up. How long had it been since they had lined up? Jindan passed. Didn't they just need to communicate with their divine sense? Was it so complicated? Looking carefully, he understood. The ones guarding the entrance of Guangqing Palace were actually 4 delicate beauties. Each one of them was as delicate as a flower, especially the 2 at the front. One was delicate and cute, with a threatening spiritual aura. She was the epitome of the word lowly. The other was indescribable. Indescribable. He felt that he was unable to describe this kind of beauty with his limited vocabulary. It was as if any praise used on this woman was blasphemy. Han Yan's beauty was beyond human. That kind of ethereal beauty made people worship her. This woman's beauty was human. Her beauty made people jealous of the unfairness of the heavens. If even men were jealous of her beauty, what kind of beauty was that? Not all cultivators who registered had the appearance of a pig. It must be said that cultivators have bestowed humans with a mysterious ability. Their willpower could easily cut apart the desires of the lower 3 paths. No matter what they thought in their hearts, on the surface, they would remain the same. The arrogant ones were still arrogant, the cautious ones were still cautious, the arrogant ones were still arrogant, and the inferior ones were still inferior. It was as if the person who registered them was an ordinary cultivator, and it had nothing to do with their appearance. This was also a kind of desire to show off. It was a very clever kind. It was a kind that was more easily accepted by cultivators. Because of the beauty of the woman, they had no choice but to show their matching side. In fact, this was already a failure. However, no one would be foolish enough to say that their family owned a few minds, or how impressive their ancestors were, or how powerful their abilities were compared to their peers. If they said these things, it would only prove their shallowness. As a cultivator, no one did not understand this point, even if many of them were elites who had cultivated for several generations. This kind of registration itself was a kind of offense. Under normal circumstances, cultivators only needed to report their name and origin with their divine sense. There was no need to report anything else. Cultivators attached great importance to privacy. This was like checking a household register. Who would be willing to do this? However, in front of these 4 earth cultivators, especially the first 2, all dissatisfaction disappeared without a trace. This in itself explained a lot. If it had been someone like Lu Xiaoyi who was standing there and asking some strange and irrelevant questions, he would have been beaten to a pulp long ago. He coldly watched from the sidelines. He discovered that as long as they were from Huangting Taoism, they would often be brushed aside. If they were from other continents, they would always ask a few more questions. Of course, the questions were asked very appropriately. The polite tone and the gentle words of the beautiful woman were often able to soothe the slight dissatisfaction of the cultivator, leading to unconditional cooperation. The fairy-like little girl was responsible for recording. Her large eyes blinked as she looked at people with worship. It caused every cultivator who passed by to have an impulse to protect her. The 2 of them both had a desire that made people want to embrace them. It was just that one of them was a Tao companion, and the other was a daughter. 2 seductresses. Weren't they just standing here to use a honey trap? They wanted to use this to fish out details about him, a great thief. What were they thinking? His thoughts were both correct and incorrect. Facing their opponents, this was indeed the deliberate actions of the earth cultivators. What was wrong was that the 2 women truly didn't use any bewitching techniques. The Huangting Taoism didn't teach their disciples these things. Their methods were only based on their respective strengths in the spiritual domain. Inya's eyes were pure and innocent, able to make people unconsciously develop a desire to protect her. They would subconsciously show their different side, and if they were careless, they would reveal the secrets at the bottom of their hearts. Xiao Bingji, on the other hand, relied entirely on her speaking skills. With her unparalleled appearance and her soft and gentle voice, she was able to draw out what she truly wanted to know with a few seemingly unrelated words. They had already received people here for several days. Several hundred cultivators walked past their eyes and were divided into different categories according to the level of suspicion. Among them, Inya had her own method of comparison, and Xia Yubing had another. In the end, the two of them would compare and find a most suspicious one. Rouge wasn't just a skeleton, she was also a touchstone. The reception was nearing its end. From tomorrow onwards, there would be much fewer cultivators participating in the treasure appraisal conference. This was also a rule, a form of respect for the organizers. Another cultivator arrived at the entrance. It was a sunny young man. Although he was called Sunny, it was only relative to ordinary people. He was actually very ordinary among cultivators. He didn't have a uniqueness of a crane and a flock of chickens like Master Yin. However, Xia Bingji's gentleness was directed towards all cultivators. Inya's eyes had never changed from person to person. You're a guest from afar, and it's tiring to rush here and there. For some mundane things to trouble a noble person to travel here and there, this little girl really feels uneasy. I hope at the treasure appraisal conference can make up for fellow Taoist time. This little girl is Xia Bingji, Inya. Greetings, fellow Taoist. Lu Xiaoyi chuckled. It's not hard, it's not hard. Treasures are the most important. How can I not be fortunate to see such a beauty today? You want to register, right? Xiao Yao Yu Shan Air. Shan Air as in pair, air as in ear, unmarried. Inya covered her mouth and laughed. You don't have to report your marital status. Lu Xiaoyi smiled. I have to report it. I have to report it. My parents are dead. I have a car, a house, and a small amount of savings. The only thing I lack is to warm my bed. I can speak when I'm 5, pee when I'm 7. I build my foundation when I'm 30, and I'm 200 core elder. I have nothing to do, so I'm strolling around the yellow court. I'm fated today. The ancestral tombs are shining. Xia Bingji helplessly interrupted him. Although this was very impolite, she didn't know if he was born like this or if he was just putting on an act. Fellow Taoist, glib tongue is good. Your mentality is pure. It's also a blessing to be as naive as fellow Taoist after cultivating to Jin Dan. I wonder if Senior Marshal Brother Sean has any other specialties other than glib tongues? The treasure appraisal conference isn't just about appraising treasures. There's also a series of activities. My Yellow Court sect has also prepared a surprise for everyone. Lu Xiaoyi thought for a while. My specialties? It's especially long. My specialties are unparalleled in sword techniques. Today, I'll show you. Who has injustice? The two beauties didn't show any reaction to this kind of obvious mockery. There were hundreds of people, and there were all kinds of strange things. Previously, there were people who teased even more blatantly than this person. As people who had a mission, if they couldn't even endure this kind of teasing, how could they enter the little front court? Xiao Yao Yu? Xiao Yao and the Huangting Taoism had always minded their own business. There were no grievances between the two forces, so of course, they couldn't be considered allies. However, this was the temperament of Xiao Yao cultivators. Many people cultivated until they were out of tune. This person might be in such a situation. Chapter 731. Lu Xiaoyi slowly walked into Guangqing Palace. At the very least, he knew a fact. The few Kun cultivators that were receiving him at the door weren't as harmless as they looked. His frivolity was slightly excessive, but this was the best method to probe the objective of Guangqing Palace's treasure appraisal convention. If it was only a treasure appraisal convention without any other objective, then with his words and actions, he would be bluntly driven out. But now, the Golden Hall realm cultivators were tolerant and magnanimous. Why? It went without saying. This was his last probe, and now he was basically sure that his actions would make the Golden Hall realm cultivators take notice of him. But it was nothing, as if he didn't make a move. Who would be able to frame him? Guangqing Palace was a Golden Hall side palace that didn't occupy a large area. Besides the few rows of rooms where Taoists lived and rested in the surroundings, the only large building in the entire building complex was the main palace that was divided into 3 floors. When people spoke of Guangqing Palace, they were referring to this single circular building that was slightly similar to the Temple of Heaven in his previous life, but it had an additional roof. The interior of the palace was still very spacious, and accommodating 1,000 people wasn't a problem. Amongst them, the first floor displayed formation discs and talismans. The second floor displayed miraculous pills and great medicines, and the third floor displayed spirit weapons and external objects, and it was also the place that Lu Xiaoyi paid attention to. There was still a day before the opening of the convention, and there were many cultivators either sitting, standing, or hanging on the square outside Guangqing Palace. If one carefully distinguished them, one would be able to notice some extremely interesting things. For example, there weren't many Golden Hall realm cultivators. Theoretically speaking, when a grand event like this was held in the Golden Hall continent, the majority of the people that came should surely be local cultivators. But in reality, besides those cultivators that displayed their treasures, the ratio of Golden Hall realm cultivators and foreign cultivators was roughly in a 50-50 state. This didn't make sense. Lu Xiaoyi was able to understand the situation. Someone had surely notified them and made some sort of restriction. Otherwise, merely the local Jindan cultivators that swarmed into this tiny place would be able to squeeze it to the point of bursting. Since the number of local and foreign Jindan cultivators were so different, would they be unable to control it properly? This was a false proposition. Even if there were people with ill intentions amongst the guests, those with good intentions still made up the majority. Moreover, it required a certain amount of courage to cause trouble in another's home. Otherwise, one would probably be unable to leave this continent. Even if it was a small portion of fellows that wish for the world to be plunged into chaos, they would be unable to join forces because they didn't know each other. What could they do under the might of a local Golden Hall realm cultivator? The final number of participants should be less than 1,000. It was a bit of a stretch to call it a grand event, but it was still better than a regional event. He also saw a few free and unfettered wandering cultivators who were his fellow disciples. The reason why he was able to recognize them was because of the free and unfettered knot they wore. He didn't go forward to greet them because they were strangers. He treated them as fellow disciples, but they might not treat him as a brother. Just by looking at how they ignored him, he could feel the disdain the free and unfettered wandering cultivators had for a cultivator from the outer lands like him. He still hadn't truly integrated into the free and unrestrained wanderer. Firstly, he was from the outer continent, and secondly, he didn't seem to be working hard in this direction. One had to make friends, curry favor, flatter, expand one's circle, and strive hard to gain the recognition of the circle. Wait a minute, where would he have the time to do all these? This was the normal state of great cultivation sections. One had to adapt to the great cultivation environment and not let the environment adapt to oneself. Actually, not to mention the free and unfettered wandering cultivators, it was the same even in the Xianyuan sword sect. Of course, there was another method, absolute strength. Just like what he'd done in the domed ceiling in Mount E, he hadn't adapted to the circle, yet the circle was drawing closer to him. When he carefully observed the composition of the cultivators from the outer lands, there were less than 500 people, and this was surely not all the cultivators that had come to the Golden Hall continent. There were too many people that acted alone, those that only cared about their own cultivation, those that weren't interested in external things, and those that were delayed because of him. A situation that was worthy of paying attention to was that there were very few merchants instead. This was slightly unbelievable to a treasure appraisal convention, because only a large number of merchants would be able to set off the atmosphere, raise the price, and seize the opportunity to hype up the event. This was a secret that wasn't spread out to determine the success or failure of a convention. Merchants were all like flies, and they would surely be able to follow the smell over when there was a stench. The reason they didn't come was probably the same as the Golden Hall realm cultivators, and they were restricted by a certain sound. In this continent, besides the Huangting Taoism, no one was capable of accomplishing this. It was the same principle as restricting local cultivators from coming over. Too many people would easily cause chaos, and when a few thousand people were gathered together, it was really not something that a mere Jean Dan could control. Amongst these 500 people, there weren't many that came from the 9 great sects, and all of them had seen the world. They had different opinions towards external treasures, and each had their own opinions. Perhaps those that were close would come over to take a look, but to those that were far away, flying over a few tens of thousands of kilometers for the sake of feasting their eyes was entirely not worth it. The treasure appraisal convention was held slightly hastily. If it was a regular convention that was held every few years, and if the news was released half a year or a year in advance, then the number of people here would at least double. Most of the cultivators that came from outside were cultivators from the 3,000 minor sects, and they were from the so-called small places. A small place would cause one's eyesight to be slightly shallow, and one would be unable to move one's eyes away from a good thing, causing one to have slight thoughts about it. Amongst them, the bolder ones might take a risk out of desperation. This was the basic judgment of the small front courts enforcers that were led by Xia Bingji, and they were the group of people that were the most suspected. But his main targets were still placed on those Golden Hall realm cultivators. What caused him to be slightly surprised was that most of the Golden Hall realm cultivators behaved extremely normally, and they didn't have the slightest sign of being relaxed on the outside, yet were actually vigilant on the inside. He was extremely adept in observation, and from the casual movements of the cultivators, the exchange of their gazes, the looseness of their vital energy, and their unhurried actions, he was able to sense something at a deeper level. A well-trained cultivator was able to easily accomplish this. And if a few hundred were like this, then it could only mean that they were indeed unaware. That could only prove that they were loose on the inside and tight on the outside. The Huangting Taoism had been arranged outside to guard against escape. This was also the reason why a large barrier was set up during the treasure appraisal convention. Now that he'd entered, it wasn't easy for him to leave unless he didn't participate in the treasure appraisal convention any longer. This wasn't strange. If it was him who was in charge of this capture, he would place his main forces outside as well. The influence of directly making a move within the Guangxing Palace was too great, and this was something that couldn't satisfy both sides. If it was a quiet place, then the bandits wouldn't come, whereas a complicated place was easy to cause chaos, so placing his forces outside seemed to be the only choice. But there were surely insiders within the Guangxing Palace that had set up the trap. He was able to confirm one thing, and that was that the possessor of the treasure surely knew. There were also those elites that planned this, and there were surely a small number of them mixed within the crowd of cultivators, trying to observe who was more suspicious and who had motives. These elites that planned this would surely include those few Kuan cultivators at the entrance. This was his intuition. No matter who presided over this kind of capture, they would also arrange for capable people to contact every single participant through conversation at the first possible moment. He didn't know if they were true elites, but there was nothing wrong with their appearances. Even he who always liked to deviate slightly couldn't help but praise them in his heart, and for the sake of probing something, he even spoke frivolously, and that was a sin. Chapter 732. Should I reach my goal by coming into contact with these earth cultivators? Lu Xiaoyi was somewhat hesitant. It wasn't hard to find an excuse to stick to them. He just had to pretend to be a pig. In any case, he had already shown it when he registered at the door. This could satisfy his dissatisfaction with the Huangting Taoism, find some fun, and also get in touch with the beauties. However, he wasn't sure how far he could go. Don't look at the two beauties. They weren't easy to fool. He didn't want to expose himself before he could get anything out of them. If he didn't stick to them and just observe them in secret, this treasure appraisal trip would be destined to be a dull experience. Other than drooling over those treasures, he wouldn't be able to obtain anything. He really wanted to know what role the person who set him up played in the Huangting Taoism. This would help him determine whether he should continue to commit crimes here or simply run away. Before he could think of a reason, someone had already found him, although he appeared to be very calm, as if it was just a casual conversation. Fellow Taoist, Dan came from the carefree continent. compared to the carefree continent. Is there any difference? This was a very ordinary cultivator. Judging from his aura, he had formed his gold core for more than 300 years. He had already reached the awkward stage of whether he could reach the upper realm. Lu Xiaoyi treated him with courtesy. Spring orchids and autumn chrysanthemums. Each has its own advantages. However, we cultivators are free in the world. There's no need to compare the advantages and disadvantages of any continent, right? Old Jean Dan carefully sized him up and ridiculed. Fellow Taoist, Dan hasn't been in the carefree continent for long, but you can understand the true meaning of carefree. You're a true seed of cultivation. However, in my opinion, true carefree is to indulge in mountains and rivers and place your feelings in nature. It's not to wander about and attract bees and butterflies, right? Lu Xiaoyi immediately understood the old cultivator's meaning. This was a warning for him to speak frivolously at the door. This meant that if he wanted to be romantic, he should go back to the carefree continent and stop causing trouble in the Huangting continent. Now, someone else had already helped him make a choice. Even if he didn't want to provoke the two flowers, he was afraid that he couldn't do it. At the same time, he could also tell that this old cultivator must be the same as the other women. They were part of the group of people who knew the truth. In other words, they were the ones who knew about this arrangement. The reason was very simple. Old Xiao knew that he had just joined carefree travel not long ago, which meant that the Imperial Court's intelligence system was very clear that he was just a person from the outer land who had joined carefree travel. He had not yet entered the circle of carefree travel's core disciples. When a great power wanted to know something, there was no doubt about its efficiency. However, the people who set the trap were able to use the Golden Court's information system. What did this mean? You are, Old Dan said calmly. Huang Tinglin sure. Lu Xiaoyi nodded and said with a smile, to express one's love to mountains and rivers, the first thing one must do is to experience mountains and rivers. Otherwise, how could he send it? My state of mind is not there yet. I'm still looking around. When I encounter a good scenery, I stop to take a look and appreciate it. Isn't that too much? Old Dan's face showed displeasure. Is it appropriate for a person who has left the world to indulge in the scenery? Lu Xiaoyi laughed. To leave the world, one must first enter the world. Even fellow Taoist Lin can bow for the scenery, let alone this poor Taoist. Old Dan was not angry. This is not my business. However, seeing that fellow Taoist Dan is young and has a bright future, I can't bear to see you suffer setbacks. Therefore, I came to remind you that there must be someone guarding the place within 3 steps of where the flowers bloom. Passers-by, just take a look. Why linger? That's all I have to say today. Where do you want to go? Take care of yourself. On the 3rd floor of Guangxing Palace, there were 2 figures standing. Although there was no conflict in the square outside the palace, and there were no crude words spoken, as if it was a chance encounter between 2 old friends, it still could not escape the attention of those who were observant. Inya said angrily, "Is it Qingqing or Hongyi? These 2 people's mouths are fast. How long has it been? And it has already spread to my 9th brother?" Xia Bingji sighed. "It doesn't matter who it is. Let's spread. However, it might not be your 9th brother's idea. It could also be Lin Shi's own idea. He is about to break through to the nascent soul realm and needs help." Inya's eyes turned. Sister Bing still knows my 9th brother very well. Seeing that her senior sister did not speak, she said angrily, "But whether you know him or not, Sister Bing will never be with my 9th brother, right? Why? I heard people say that the biggest taboo in love in this world is to get 2 equally outstanding people together. The red flower still needs the green leaf to match. Is this the truth? Then both of them are really too outstanding. Sister Bing, you won't find a mediocre Tao companion in the end, right?" Xia Bingji sighed. "It's good to be alone. Why must the 2 of them be together? There are so many disputes. Cultivation nowadays is very boring. Is it just to find someone to quarrel with? And your 9th brother will never quarrel. Let's not talk about this. Have you come to a conclusion about the preliminary judgment of those participants?" Inya did not give up. I don't know what these 2 people talked about. Why didn't they quarrel? Why didn't they fight? Although senior brother Lin sure is a bit of a dog trying to catch a mouse, that one ear indeed has a foul mouth. It's good to teach him a lesson. When I asked him about his specialty, he actually answered like this. How crude. No wonder he came from a small place and has no manners at all. Looking at her senior sister's calm gaze, she could only shut up. I'll ask senior brother Lin sure myself later. I've come to a conclusion, but I feel that these people are all very shrewd. It's really hard to judge. Sister Bing, why do I have a feeling that it's not just one thief, but a group of thieves? Xia Bingji comforted her. Those who dare to come out and roam Zhou Xian are almost all outstanding people in their sections. There are very few good-for-nothings who dare to come out casually. So what you see now can actually be considered as the elite disciples of various continents in Zhou Xian. They're not fools and have their own keen senses. Our arrangements can't be hidden from everyone, Enya frowned. Compared with the past records at the crack and our own collection of information about the disciples of other sects, there's no one with an unknown background. This is strange. When did the people who came to the Yellow Court continent become so rule-abiding? So I feel that the range of people who are problematic is larger. There are more than 100 of them. Xia Bingji took out her own jade slip. On it was her own preliminary judgment. The grades were divided into suspicious, uncertain, harmless, and trustworthy. Among them, suspicious and trustworthy were the least. Most of them were still in uncertain and harmless. By comparing the two grades, they could find the people they both suspected. This came from a certain mysterious ability in this aspect, and the experience they had accumulated over a long period of time. In this way, about 50 people appeared on the list. Most of them were Taoist Yinyu and monk Zhou Fong from Little Lu. However, they also matched their initial judgment. It's these people. Sister Bing, should we focus on observing and tracking them? Xia Bingji thought for a moment. How many cultivators do we both think are definitely not problematic? Enya compared again and smiled. Sister Bing, we tend to agree on the problematic candidates. Half of them are the same. However, we're poles apart when it comes to those who aren't problematic at all. Let me see. Among these hundreds of people, there's only one person who we both think is definitely not problematic. It's that one ear. Xia Bingji said softly. Then list him as the most suspicious. Chapter 733. The Grand Opening of the Treasure Appraisal Convention. The ceremony was simple because they were all young Jindan cultivators, so they didn't have the lethargy of seniors. Moreover, if there were any changes during the convention, an overly long speech now would be a bit of slap to the face, so it was skipped quickly. Lu Xiaoyi didn't conceal his unique interest in equipment crafting. His method of looking around before finally going to the place he liked was a bit too obvious, especially under the current situation where he might be monitored. There would surely be someone monitoring him, even though he couldn't sense it. When this trap became the background of a power and not the actions of a small group, an ancient inheritance like the Huangting Taoism would surely have its own unique secrets. Moreover, in such a relatively narrow place with hundreds of people crowding around and divine senses crisscrossing like a spiderweb, how would you determine if someone was watching you? Who was watching you? He directly arrived at the 3rd floor of Guangqing Palace, the place where the spirit artifacts were displayed, and it was also the floor with the most people gathered on the 3rd floor. The organizers' arrangement for the display this time was very unique. There were a total of 19 artifacts that had been refined with top-grade materials, and 5 artifacts would be displayed at a time. Every display would last for 7 days, and then another batch would be changed. Amongst the 5 artifacts, the top-grade materials involved were all different. There were spatial materials, soul-gathering materials, ancient beast materials, star materials, and mysterious materials, yet there wasn't a single material of the 5 elements. Lu Xiaoyi understood that this was the organizer paving the way for the great thief to make a move, allowing the great thief to familiarize himself with the process of the treasure appraisal convention, the layers of defense inside and outside, and the surrounding crowd that he could borrow. Golden Hall realm cultivators were extremely familiar with the psychological trends of great thieves. Any experienced, ambitious, cautious, An extremely daring great thief would have a set of rules of conduct that belonged to him alone. They would surely observe first, carefully observe to find the flaws of the treasure appraisal convention, the pattern of activity of the patrolling cultivators, the psychological trends of the surrounding crowd, the strength of the restrictions placed on the treasures, whether the treasures carried some sort of tracking aura, and so on and so forth. All of these things required time to be slowly seen through with divine sense. In the end, they still had to consider how to make a move, how to make use of the chaos in the crowd, how to choose a route to break out of the encirclement. This was a technical and meticulous job, and it wasn't something that a rash person could do. This was a great thief, not a small thief. Since he wanted to lure the bandits out, he couldn't put up the precious 5 elements materials right from the start, because the bandits might choose to give up because he was too hasty. He had to do it step by step, allowing the bandit to slowly familiarize himself with everything around him and the convention. While familiarizing himself with the bandit, he would slowly cultivate his greed. Only then would he act when he felt that he was absolutely safe. What a profound psychological prediction. Therefore, although the 5 spiritual weapons displayed now were more valuable than the 5 elements materials in a sense, since they were not in the pockets of the 5 elements bandits, they could only show them in advance. This was a warm-up process to nurture one ear's emotions. Lu Xiaoyi was bored when he thought about how he still needed 7 days to cultivate his emotions. He wanted to tell the beauties loudly. One of my ears has turned over a new leaf. This time, I promise I won't make a move. Hurry up and take out the good stuff so that he can have a basic understanding of the treasure and the cultivator who holds the treasure. Then, close the curtain and part ways. Unfortunately, he couldn't. There was a round platform at the center of the 3rd floor. 5 cultivators sat cross-legged in 5 different directions, and in front of them, their respective treasures floated in the air and slowly rotated. The rule was, you can look, but whether I want to explain it to you or not, that would purely depend on my mood. In reality, the most important thing would surely not be said stupidly. It would depend on your eyesight to see if you could discover something from the circulation of the spiritual opportunity of the spiritual weapon. Occasionally, there would be exchanges. For example, a core disciple of the clear immortal sect similarly took out his own spatial spiritual weapon. Of course, the materials weren't so high-end, and it was placed side by side with the Golden Hall Realm cultivator's spiritual weapon. The two of them exchanged their experiences on spatial spiritual weapons, comparing their strengths and weaknesses, discussing their gains and losses, and researching the refinement methods. They complemented each other, and the people beside them also benefited endlessly. The only thing they couldn't accept was to ask impatiently, is it painful to hit people with this thing? How many layers of restrictions are there? How far can it hit? How's the penetration? What special methods do you have? Sometimes, when they were in the mood to chat, they would control the spiritual weapons to collide with each other to feel the might of each other's spiritual weapons. When there were many people participating, several cultivators would each take out a spiritual weapon of the same nature and communicate with each other. This was also the time when there were the most spectators. Lu Xiaoyi couldn't get involved in these exchanges. It was very difficult to see through flying swords, as they weren't like spirit weapons that had countless applications, endless expansions, and different directions of deepening. This was the pleasure of a spell cultivator. Flying swords had a single function, and it was very simple to compare their strengths and weaknesses. Each sword would strike once, and the loser would be distressed to repair it, and the winner would be complacent. So he could only watch, and when he was truly bored, he would run to the 1st floor to look at formation discs and talismans. He wasn't interested in talismans, but he still had some knowledge in the Tao of formations, and it was better than being bored and watching others boast. Formation discs were more interesting to look at because they involved some very rational things, like the integrated circuits in his previous life. His way of thinking in this aspect was somewhat different from this cultivation world. So even if he couldn't take out his own formation discs, he could still chat with the owner of the formation discs. When it was intense, he would even argue a little, Because he always wanted to help others change their formation discs a few days later, he actually spent more time on the formation discs on the first floor than on the third floor. The key was that he could blend in and become a freak among the cultivators of the Tao of formations. The number of cultivators who argued with him also increased. Benefiting from the arguments and converging in differences was also an important way to improve in cultivation. Then he felt a strange gaze behind him. It had already happened many times. Of course, someone as thick-skinned as Lu Xiaoyi wouldn't pretend not to know. That was the foolish thought of a steely man. This was actually a disguised invitation. If you couldn't understand, then you deserve to be without a Tao companion for the rest of your life. Miss, what's your name? Do you have a different understanding of my Tao of formations? Lu Xiaoyi leaned forward, and a strange fragrance assailed his nostrils. It was meaningful but not strong, and it was quite comfortable to smell. Inya, I don't understand Tao of formations, but I find it interesting when you argue with others. You look anxious and pale, like a scholar, but not like a cultivator. Inya? Good name, just like the person. Inya Finya. Then, is Missy married? Who would ask this question when they first met? But considering this person's strange behavior, she didn't think it was surprising. Inya was Dafa. Not yet. In Inya's eyes, the strange person in front of her just said, "Oh," as if he was regretful. This didn't make sense. Shouldn't he be overjoyed when he heard this news? Inya had always insisted that this person was the kind of person who was completely harmless and trustworthy. Her observation over the past few days had confirmed this point. She went to the third floor first. This was nothing. There were 1,000 people present, and more than half of them went to the third floor. But this one ear was obviously very careless about the understanding of spiritual tools. He looked around hurriedly, and the boredom on his face was very obvious. It wasn't until she came to the first floor that she confirmed this person's hobby and interest. Yes, he liked Tao formations. This was completely unrelated to being a great thief. She also felt a little regretful. If this one ear was a great thief, how interesting would it be? Chapter 734. Why do I only see you talking about arrays, but I don't see you taking out a real array disc? Could it be that you're just a talker? Inya's unique adulthood determined that she would not beat around the bush. She was so straightforward that it was cute. Of course, not everyone could be this straightforward. For example, Lu Xiaoyi would be rude and hateful if he were to use it. In this world, beautiful things always had an advantage. This proved that most people still preferred beautiful things. Lu Xiaoyi shrugged. I'm a swordsman. Have you ever seen a swordsman playing with array discs? Wouldn't that be self-restraint? But everyone has different hobbies. My roots are in the sword, but it doesn't mean that I can't like arrays. Similarly, I also like artifacts. I like those things on the third floor very much. It's a pity that they're taken. Inya smiled. I heard that swordsmen are the most restless. If they're taken, you can still snatch them. Sure. Lu Xiaoyi raised a finger to his lips. Please, lower your voice. Don't say what's on my mind. Guangqing Palace isn't peaceful now. You're just joking and treating me like a flying thief. Although I really want to do it, I haven't done it yet, have I? Inya narrowed her eyes and said, Does everyone who comes here have the desire to rob? Also, what's wrong with Guangqing Palace? How do you know it's not peaceful? I think it's very normal. Lu Xiaoyi pointed at her and smiled. Little girl, you're not telling the truth. Your Huangting Taoism is such an obvious trap. Do you think everyone is stupid? Forget it. You won't admit it even if I know. But you're right about one thing. Almost everyone here has the desire to take the treasure for themselves. It's just that most people only think about it. Only a few will actually do it. Inu was very curious. So, One Ear, are you the kind that you think about? Or the kind that you do? Lu Xiaoyi pretended to be unhappy. Don't call me One Ear. Otherwise, I'll call you a duck. I want to do it, but it's not easy to do it here. It's better to think of a way after the meeting is over. Inu felt that talking to this person was very interesting. He was completely different from the cultivators she interacted with on a daily basis. She had stayed in the Yellow Court sect for a long time and rarely went out for long journeys. The Yellow Court sect was also the most old-fashioned and conservative sect in the Zhou Xian upper realm. This was not in line with her nature, and she felt a little bored. Why go through so much trouble? I'm also one of the exhibitors of this year's treasure appraisal convention. Do you want to guess what type of treasure I have? Is it on the first floor? Or the second or third floor? Lu Xiaoyi looked at the beauty in front of him with interest. To be honest, when he really had thoughts in his heart, he would often become clumsy, but when he didn't care, he would become very witty. I'm guessing it's definitely not the second floor. That's because some people's beauty doesn't come from eating pills. It's all natural. Inya's eyes were almost curved into circles. Although one ear was so unbearable and lecherous, his words were really nice. It's also not the first floor. That's because you rarely appear here. Also, I can't imagine what kind of formation suits you. The formation is too rigid, and those lines are lifeless. It would be better if they were changed into fresh flowers. Inya did not wait for him to finish. She took out a blue flower from her ring and smiled. You guessed it right. It's this butterfly blue. It's made from the water element treasure, the boundless water. What do you think? One handed it over naturally while the other took it, as if it was an ordinary item. Once butterfly blue was in his hand, Lu Xiaoyi immediately took a few steps back. His eyes darted behind him, and he looked like he was about to run away. Let me guess. Is there anyone coming from behind? Inya laughed so hard that she fell over. You'll know when you run further away. Lu Xiaoyi pretended to think about it carefully, but he still shook his head and returned the flower orchid. Throughout the whole process, he didn't take the opportunity to use his divine sense to investigate. In fact, if he really did investigate, the yellow court Taoist tracking aura would definitely not be able to escape his senses. This was the fundamental difference between using one's eyes and divine sense to scan and using one's hands. He was very clear-headed. If he really did investigate, this act would be over. He would know what this woman was plotting, and this woman would put him on the list of suspects. I don't understand this thing. It looks like a spittoon. Inya said, nothing good comes out of dog's mouth. The best water element spiritual weapon in the yellow core continent is just a spittoon in your mouth. Can't you describe it in a good way? Lu Xiaoyi was helpless. I've already described it in a good way. According to my habit, I was going to say a chamber pot. At night, Inya came to the top of Guangqing Palace. Xia Bingji was still standing there quietly like an ice sculpture. Only when the wind blew her skirt could one vaguely see her vitality. This was her habit. Whenever there was something she could not decide, she would always lean on the railing and look into the distance. She would try her best to open her mind and find traces that she had not noticed before. Inya, on the other hand, was in a very good mood because she had made another interesting friend. After standing together for a long time, she could not help but express her opinion. I think that one ear can't be the five elements bandit. Senior sister, you're wrong. He likes formations and has his own unique views on it. When the senior brothers on the first floor argued with him, none of them could beat him. Moreover, I showed him my butterfly blue, and he didn't dare to do anything. Xia Bingji was speechless. This little princess was sometimes very astute, but sometimes she was muddle-headed. Just like now. I saw it all. Of course he didn't dare to do anything, because he knew that if he dared to walk out of Guangqing Palace with your butterfly blue, he would be surrounded by a group of people. So he didn't even use his divine sense. With such a treasure, he didn't even check it out. Is this normal? Maybe it's out of respect for me. I feel that although he has a foul mouth, he has a good heart. Inya persisted. Xia Bingji sighed. I just received news from Huangting Mountain. When this person entered, Marshal Uncle by happened to be guarding the crack. I feel that this person's five elements ability is very impressive. So he can't be cleared of suspicion. Inya widened her eyes. Senior sister, you're not possessed, are you? Why are you staring at him? Is there a problem with focusing on the five elements? At the Jin Dan level, other than the five elements, yin and yang, are there any other paths? There are close to 1,000 people here, and more than half of them are studying the five elements. 20% have some gains, and less than 10% have some specialization. This is also the reason why those spiritual weapons with top grade 5 elements materials are so popular. Xia Bingji was very serious. I didn't pay attention to him. In fact, I paid the least attention to him among all my suspects. But now I have no choice but to pay attention to him, because you are constantly reminding me. The more harmless this person appears, the more worried I am about him. Not only do I have to worry about a great thief stealing my weapon, I have to worry about a great thief stealing my heart. Is there a need for this? Since when have I, Enya, been bewitched by a wandering cultivator from such a small place? Enya was very unconvinced. Xiao Bingji felt that it was too difficult for her. This girl wouldn't understand that when you think you are manipulating others, using spiritual weapons to test them, and teasing them verbally, you have actually fallen into a pit. You just don't know it. The worst thing is that once you fall into this pit, you won't be able to climb out. Chapter 735. Enya had an interesting playmate. She was disdainful, ridiculing, and slandering someone else's top-notch treasures. You just saying that the grapes are sour because you can't eat them. You shamelessly suppress them, but in fact you can't wait to pick one up and run. Enya mercilessly exposed his thoughts. Lu Xiaoyi was indifferent. Grapes that can't be eaten are naturally sour. A woman who can't marry must be ugly. What's the problem? One duck, look at that person's water attribute spirit weapon. Compared to your material, which one is better? Enya was disdainful. So what? How can first heaven water be more precious than boundless water? Although they're both first-grade top-notch materials, there's still a difference. How can the heaviness of heavy water be closer to the essence of water than the ethereal boundless water? Is water used to compare weight? Why don't you compare it with rocks? One ear, your taste is really bad. You don't even understand such a simple logic. Lu Xiaoyi sneered. You see, I don't know what's heavy and ethereal. I only know that some people think that what they have is good and that what others have is bad. This is the same logic as whether the grapes are sour or not. After 7 days, the treasures on the 3rd floor were naturally changed. This time, it was a display of 5 top-notch materials of the 5 elements: metal, wood, water, fire, and earth, one in each row. Huangting Taoism's arrangement could be said to be quite considerate. In order to provoke the thief to make a move, they deliberately put one in each row to entice him to come and eat his fill. In the past few days, Enya had taken out a few hours to accompany Lu Xiaoyi almost every day. In her heart, she was paying close attention to a special suspect. Little did she know that her so-called surveillance had already changed its meaning. She was deceiving herself and others, thinking that she was infallible. I won't bicker with you. When I go on stage, you'll know how popular my blue butterfly is. There are countless sensible people in Guanqing Palace. Who is like you? I think you're not only one ear, but also one eye. You're half-an. Lu Xiaoyi laughed. You're really a female Zhuge. I'm still a one-headed garlic. How do you know? Enya didn't quite understand. This slang wasn't in the Yellow Court Continent's language system. What's a single-head garlic? Lu Xiaoyi didn't want to go into detail. He didn't want to lead the child astray. Nothing, it's just a nose. Duck, where are you going on stage? Is it for the finale? Enya snorted. With my butterfly blue. Is that wrong? Lu Xiaoyi flattered. Of course, if a duck goes up, it will definitely attract the most attention. But I don't think they're looking at spirit artifacts. It's more likely that they're looking at people. It was rare that Enya did not retort. One ear's words were too vicious. Although he was belittling Butterfly Blue, he was elevating her as a person. What he said made sense. But I just can't stand so many ill-intentioned gazes. Sitting there and being judged with a few vulgar words, you still have to listen. Lu Xiaoyi began to bluff. Enya listened very seriously. Dirty words? You have the nerve to say that it only has one ear. There are thousands of people in Guanqing Palace. Other than you, I've never heard anyone else say anything dirty. But what you said makes sense. I'm not like them, sitting there and being judged. Why don't I wear the spirit-severing headscarf? Lu Xiaoyi smirked. You don't know that when a man evaluates a woman, appearance is actually secondary. It includes her 3 measurements. Enya was very wary. What are your 3 measurements? Lu Xiaoyi explained. It's the size of your chest, waist, and hips. Enya was so angry that she wanted to hit him, but this guy had already jumped away and refused to admit his mistake. You forced me to say it. You can't blame me. After some thought, Inya had an idea. One ear, aren't we friends? Lu Xiaoyi was very firm. Not when you're borrowing money. If you're not borrowing money, I can consider it. Inya smiled and said, how about this? I'll give you butterfly blue, and you go up and sit on stage for me. Lu Xiaoyi refused firmly. I'm not going to sit on stage. I'm definitely not going to sit on stage. Which old master thinks highly of it? Do you want me to sit on stage? One duck. It's not that I don't want to help you, but I don't know how to control your butterfly blue at all. Moreover, I'm a swordsman, so I can't play with you Dharma cultivators for a living. Don't embarrass yourself. The two of them chatted and laughed. It was another happy day, but one of them had completely let go of her emotions, while the other had hidden his shrewdness. In the evening, Guangqing Palace was closed as usual. Everyone exited the palace and digested the day's gains in the square outside the palace. To cultivators, this kind of rest was not necessary, but to show respect to the person displaying the treasure, they still had to give them time to deal with their personal matters. They couldn't possibly let them sit on stage for 7 days, right? This was also the time for everyone to sit together and discuss with each other. Golden Hall Realm cultivators and Outer Land cultivators became more harmonious as the treasure appraisal convention progressed. This was because they had common topics and shared common aspirations. This period of time was also the opportunity for the cultivators of the small vestibule to completely integrate. Although there weren't many who remained in Guangqing Palace, there were still several tens of them. They would usually blend into the circle of Outer Land cultivators and converse with them, while secretly paying attention to everyone's details. This was the homework that the cultivators of the small vestibule would do every day since the treasure appraisal convention began 10 days ago. As their mutual understanding deepened, even if the majority of their conversations were about formation discs, talismans, medicinal pills, and spiritual tools, some of the things revealed could also allow people to make basic judgments. More and more people were removed from Xia Bingji's blacklist. Now, there were only a dozen or so people left that were still under observation, but there wasn't a single particularly obvious target. That's not right. In Xia Yubing's blacklist, there was a person who was occupying a more and more prominent position. This was a great thief, but what he stole wasn't things, but people's hearts. This caused her to almost be unable to think of a solution. Logically speaking, Inya wasn't a child anymore. She was several hundred years old and extremely intelligent, so she should have long since reached the age where she should find a Tao companion. But she just couldn't help but feel uneasy, because the scene wasn't right. If they were at Yellow Court Mountain, with the Yin family supporting her from behind, she wouldn't be worried about this little princess. But now, since she was the one who brought her out, and they were as close as sisters, she couldn't help but feel an inexplicable sense of worry. It was another night that was filled with an academic atmosphere. Similarly, among the countless small circles of discussion, the largest one was definitely the one that revolved around the Yellow Court Goddess. There was no lack of lectures, and Lu Xiaoyi wasn't the only one. It was just that some of them hit it deeply. Everyone was trying their best to show that they were different from the rest, but they were completely unaware of the helplessness in the heart of the goddess. Xia Bingji knew that the great thief definitely wasn't in the circle that revolved around her, so wouldn't he have to hide as far away as possible? Her original intention was to use her advantageous conditions to come into contact with Outer Land cultivators, but she didn't expect that when she really came here, she didn't have the final say in who she came into contact with, but rather the lechers. How depressing. Chapter 736. Just as she was forcing a smile to deal with the lechers, a cheerful voice rang out from the side. Senior sister, what are you guys talking about? It's so lively. Xia Bingji turned around and couldn't help but sigh. This ayah brought another lecher over. He was smiling like a dog, but his skill at stealing hearts was truly impressive. The little princess who couldn't speak a word to so many young talents on Yellow Court Mountain was now standing side by side with a young Jean Dan. Did the red flower find a green leaf? It was fine if it was a green leaf as long as she liked it, but it was probably a huge pile of dog shit. They didn't say much, just some tricks about using spirit tools. This is, Enya introduced enthusiastically. This is the one ear that senior sister and I often talk about. Oh, one ear. Actually, he's the one with the worst mouth you've seen during registration. But his heart isn't completely black, and there's still a trace of brilliance. Lu Xiaoyi pushed her away and complained. Is there anyone who introduces people like this? This poor Taoist has one ear. He comes from a good family and is unmarried. I wonder if Miss Xia. Enya giggled heartlessly at the side. He wants to ask if you have a Tao companion. Senior sister, don't blame him. He asks every Kuan cultivator like this. Were these two brainless idiots together? Xia Bingji didn't know whether to laugh or cry, and could only answer, no, but what does it have to do with you? Lu Xiaoyi sighed, pity, pity, pity what? Xia Bingji was a bit confused, and Enya laughed even more unscrupulously at the side. Senior sister, one ear is a perverted person shouldn't appear here. A voice suddenly rang out from the side. This was a handsome young man. He was dressed in white and looked like a tree in the wind. The aura that he exuded unconsciously made those who knew him feel fear. Husband Yin, the eldest senior brother of this generation of Huangting Taoism at the level of Jindan. To every cultivator who came to the Yellow Core continent, they could ignore Yuanying because Yuanying couldn't be bothered with them, but they had to care about senior brother Yin because they were Jindan's peers. He had the right to make a move. How many people could withstand the attack of the eldest senior brother of the Yellow Court Jindan? In the Joseon Upper Realm, the term eldest senior brother was different from the term fifth ring because there were too many people in Jindan, so one eldest senior brother was not enough. Here, the eldest senior brother was a class that represented those who stood at the top of the pyramid. Normally, those that had lived in the Golden Hall continent for slightly longer would have an understanding of husband Yin, and they knew where this person's reverse scale was. So even though there were many people surrounding the Golden Hall goddess, most of them knew when to stop and didn't go too far. This naturally didn't include a certain person that had come to the Golden Hall continent with ulterior motives. He'd placed all his thoughts on being a great thief, so how could he possibly care about those messy things? His words were somewhat impolite. How could Lu Xiaoyi accept that? Wasn't he just a flower protector? What eldest senior brother? He, Lu Xiaoyi, was also the eldest disciple of the famous Xianyuan sword school in the universe. How could he tolerate this? But before he could retort, a clamor came from not far away, and it immediately drew everyone's attention. It was a dispute between two treasure-viewing cultivators. Perhaps it was because they were a bit angry, so they started a fight. This was the most taboo for the organizers, especially for the cultivators in the small front courtyard. Chaos meant that someone might take the opportunity to steal the treasure. Perhaps these two people who were deliberately arguing were the accomplices of the great thief. So at the first moment, they all ran towards the source of the commotion, forcefully suppressing Lu Xiaoyi's malicious words. They could only fly along. Looking at Enya's excited expression, they couldn't help but doubt the Yellow Court sect judgment in selecting people to enforce the law. Soon, they approached the circle. The cultivators in the small front courtyard were well trained. They didn't all squeeze over, but they were on guard in all directions, guarding against possible robberies. Only husband Yin and his sister, Xia Bingji, came to the scene and watched coldly from the sidelines to see who was causing trouble. We haven't seen each other for 100 years. Brother Mao Ji, your hair has grown out? A monk sneered. Whether my hair grows out or not, this is a small matter. What does it matter to us cultivators? But Master Lampwick's brain, is he enlightened? A Taoist retorted. Taoist Mao Ji and the monk Lampwick were a pair of old enemies. They were both from the 9 great sects. Mao Ji was from the human sect, while Lampwick was from the Wanfo temple. The grudge between the two was very deep, and it couldn't be explained in a short time. The two of them had a life-and-death battle 100 years ago. In the end, they were evenly matched, and both of them were injured. In the end, Taoist Mao Ji was cast a Buddhist secret technique by the monk, and the pores on the top of his head were welded shut. On the other hand, Lampwick was cast a Taoist forbidden technique by the Taoist, and the opening of the monk's head collapsed. Both of them used their lives as a curse, and they could never recover. It sounded like their fight was child's play, but it was actually aimed at the strongest aspect of the other party. Taoist Mao Ji was from a human sect of the mortal continent. This orthodoxy was different and very down-to-earth. In Mao Ji's case, his strong points were all in the hair on his body. He emphasized that every hair was a tool, and everything was natural. All of his skills were in the hair on his body, because the human sect believed that the pores on the human body were the bridge between the heaven and earth that connected humans and nature. There was a great way in it. The cultivators in the sect cultivated their skills with their hair. Of course, their fighting skills were all in the hair. When fighting against an enemy, they could pluck a strand of hair and use spiritual tools, elixirs, and other external objects to carve it. Because it nourished the pores, it was also extraordinarily spiritual. The hair on the human body was the most important. Therefore, when the monk welded the pores on the top of the Taoist's head, it was equivalent to crippling more than half of the Taoist's strength. The monk was the opposite. His Buddhist magic items were all hidden in the sea of consciousness in his Niwan palace. Buddhism called it the divine treasure, nirvana mustard. When needed, all he had to do was hit the top of his head, and the items would come out automatically. However, the nirvana mustard art of Buddhism had a fixed passage, and it couldn't come out randomly. Taoist Mao Ji had collapsed the passage of the items on the top of the monk's head. He'd caused the items that the monk refined with great difficulty to be stuck in the nirvana mustard and become trash. Both of them had made a killing move, and they'd sealed it with their lives as the price. In other words, so long as the monk was still alive, the Taoist would forever be unable to grow hair. Similarly, so long as the Taoist was still alive, the monk's head wouldn't be able to contain Buddhist treasures any longer. The enmity of 100 years was like life and death, and it couldn't be reconciled. When they encountered each other in this treasure appraisal meeting, they were naturally at loggerheads and refused to give way to each other. No matter how the surrounding cultivators tried to persuade them, they still wanted to determine who was superior. Of course, it was impossible to allow the two of them to do as they pleased in the territory of the Golden Hall continent. They had to take the face of their master into consideration, and they couldn't mess up the treasure appraisal meeting. Since it was a treasure appraisal meeting, then each of them brought out their own treasures and fought to determine who was superior was a must. It was precisely because both of them had some background and were figures that came from the 9 great sects that the Golden Hall realm cultivators couldn't rashly stop them. After all, they were following the rules and competing for treasures, and they weren't really fighting. Chapter 737. Enemies were bound to meet in 100 years. After the other party's main combat techniques were sealed, they wondered what kind of special techniques they had learned over the years. Both of them wanted to know the other party's trump card. Everyone was curious as well. Hence, they cleared a large space for the two of them to compete in treasures. Such a scene had happened before in this treasure appraisal convention. However, the previous few times, it was just small conflicts. It was not as serious as this time, where they had to use their real skills to slap each other in the face. This was what everyone wanted to see. Treasure appraisal was too dull. They needed some excitement to enrich the process. The crowd quickly surrounded them. Fortunately, they were not mortals, so there would not be a stampede. Even so, the cultivators in the small front yard were extremely nervous. They were afraid that something unexpected would happen during the process. If the hair of a human sect cultivator doesn't grow from the top of his head, where else can it grow from? Inu was very curious. Lu Xiaoyi laughed. This question is too childish. Armpit hair is not hair. There's also beard, chest hair, leg hair, or hair. Anyway, there's a lot of hair. How can it all be cut off? Master Yin glared at him fiercely. His meaning was that he was rude in front of Kuin's guests. If he did not restrain himself, he would teach him a lesson. However, Inu was not afraid of anything. Armpit hair? One ear? You're so disgusting. What about monks? If Buddhist objects can't be hidden in the sea of consciousness, I heard that their dantian can't contain external objects, right? Then where can they be kept? The angrier Yin Xiaobai was, the more Lu Xiaoyi wanted to provoke him. Break the obsession in your heart. Where can you not be blessed? The Yuan Ming Buddha's eyes always shine, but people don't know it. It only appears in the mind and changes in the mind. How can it be normal? Since the top of the head is obscure, why not just go through the urinary tract? Inya giggled. I've never seen someone as disgusting as you. One has armpit hair, and the other has urinary tract. I think Taoists should have beards. Monks and Buddhist objects can go through the ears and nostrils. Anyway, it's not that disgusting. Ninth brother, Sister Bing, what do you think? Master Een snorted. Taoists pluck their chest hair, and Buddhas grow their navel. What's there to guess? Seeing that her senior sister did not speak, Inya was not satisfied. Senior sister? Xiao Bingji shook her head and sighed. I don't know. I don't know much about these two orthodoxies. Perhaps what your ninth brother said makes more sense. When Inya saw that they didn't support her judgment, she was very dissatisfied. She glared at Lu Xiaoyi, who had been smiling foolishly beside her. What are you laughing at? In any case, no matter where I go, I definitely won't take the path of your ear. You don't have the grace of cultivator at all. Lu Xiaoyi smiled, but didn't say anything. It was just a joke, a disgusting joke. How would he know the cultivation secrets of these two fellows? The trick of prediction was to predict in the most unimaginable direction. If you get it right, you'll be a god. If you get it wrong, you'll know that you're joking. In a gambling arena, two Jin Dan cultivators stood facing each other. Other people were only half joking about this kind of treasure, but these two were serious. After 100 years of grudges, they would test each other out first. Once the competition was over, they would definitely have a fight. Today's competition was a form of accumulation of power. Taoist Mao Ji had a short temper. He smiled, raised his left hand, and stretched out his right hand. He dug under his armpit and took out 3 armpit hairs. He threw them into the air. They grew in the wind and turned into 3 spiritual objects: an umbrella, a rope, and a golden monkey. The human sect nurtured weapons. It was similar to the external sword sect. However, the swordsman was connected to his body's mana and spirit through the sword case. The human sect was hidden in the hair and was nourished by the bridge between the body and the outside world. It was also different. They were all true Taoist teachings. The 36,000 pores were the 36,000 places of nourishment. Ah, it's really the armpit hairs. Inya was surprised, but there was a smile in her surprise. Although she didn't like this kind of ability, in her eyes, it was funny. One ear was often crazy, but sometimes it seemed crazy, but there was a reason behind it. It was very strange. The monk with the wick did not show any weakness. Seeing that the Taoist had taken out 3 consecutive weapons, he waved his hand behind him, and 3 Buddhist objects appeared in his hand: a horsetail whisk, a Buddha bowl, and a skanda staff. Although his movements were fast, the onlookers were all Jindan stage cultivators. How good were their eyesight? Each and every one of them saw it clearly. When his hand brushed past behind his back and past behind his buttocks, the 3 Buddhist objects immediately appeared. Where else could this have come from other than the valley? This position was indeed amusing. However, in the cultivation world, there was nothing new about it. The human body was a treasure. Whether it was Taoist or Buddhist, they all had the same idea. In the eyes of cultivators, there was no difference between the importance of each part of the body, nobility, or filth. What affected people's views were just some secular views in the mortal world. Could you block the valley just because you said it was filthy? A real cultivator only cared about practicality. The body was a whole, but there was no difference between high and low. Therefore, there was no difference between the objects coming out from the top of the skull and the objects coming out from the valley. The only difference was that the top of the skull could nourish the spirit in the sea of consciousness, and the lower dantian could nourish the essence. Ah, it's really here. One ear, you're so good. You can even guess this. Lu Xiaoyi pretended to be an expert. He put his hands behind his back and raised his chin slightly. He smiled but didn't say anything. Someone at the side couldn't stand it. Master Een snorted. Jackals of the same tribe, colluding with each other. Disgusting people naturally have disgusting thoughts. They're just birds of a feather. Where it comes from is just the surface. Younger sister, yeah, don't be fooled by the surface and miss out on the more important core. Seeing his younger sister's puzzled gaze, he knew that she rarely interacted with cultivators from the outer lands and didn't understand some of the key points. In order to regain his face for making a mistake in judgment, he said a few more words. The human sex hair concealment objects is a very different cultivation system. It's based on breathing and the communication between people in the world. Don't look down on it just because it's a little funny. The objects are hidden in the pores and breathe in and out with the cultivator. It's equivalent to cultivating at any time, whether walking, sitting, or lying down, maintaining the rhythm of breathing all the time until the end of life. Therefore, it's not the least bit inferior to our orthodox Taoist method of raising objects. It's even stronger than some so-called unorthodox Taoist methods, such as the sword vein and body vein. The richness of hair lies in its abundance. The difficulty of cultivation lies in the top and bottom. The easiest way to hide an object in one's pores is at the top. It moves down, and one day, it'll reach the hair on one's feet. Then, it'll be a sharp object. This person originally hid an object at the top of his head, but now it's in his armpit. In fact, it's at the same level as his chest. Therefore, my guess from the level of his strength is correct. Rising up in adversity, his head is bald and his armpit is full of hair. In the face of adversity, he's found another way and improved instead. This person can't be underestimated. Enya stuck out her tongue. There's such a profound principle in it. However, she was already tired of her clan brother's preaching. Everything was analyzed from the root. It might be very fundamental, but after listening to it too much, it became uninteresting. If she wanted to listen to this, why not go to the elder ancestor? Wouldn't his explanation be more profound and thorough? All right. Brother, don't say any more. I won't listen to that monk's principles. It's disgusting. One ear. You've guessed correctly. What do you think of the orthodoxy of these two people? Don't reason with them. Lu Xiaoyi smiled. One's armpit, one bodhi, one anus, one world. Chapter 738. Enya laughed until she fell down. Even Xia Bingji, who was always serious, couldn't help but laugh. Being able to make people laugh was also a kind of ability. Using scenery to make people laugh was also a kind of talent. In the Yellow Court sect, there were very few people who had this kind of talent. The showdown between the two golden core cultivators, stinky armpits and dirty excrement, no longer attracted the interest of many people. The surroundings were calm and tranquil. Clearly, this was an accidental end to a grudge. In fact, there were many such coincidences among the people present. It was just that they weren't as bold as these two people. Enya and senior apprentice sister Xia Bingji were whispering, but Master Yin took a few steps back in an unnoticeable manner. Lu Xiaoyi followed behind and had a tacit understanding. Are they going to negotiate? Master Yin was straightforward and didn't show the slightest bit of mercy. Towards this kind of loafer-like carefree cultivator, he should directly suppress him with high pressure. Moreover, this person wasn't from the orthodox carefree Tao system, so there wasn't much to worry about. In my life, there are two women who are the most important to me. One is my younger sister, Aya, and the other is my sweetheart, Abing. And you actually made a move against the two of them in front of me. You've just joined the Carefree Travel Association, and you think the Carefree Travel Association can support you? Why don't you go talk to your senior apprentice brothers? Do you not know them? Or treat them as strangers? I'll only say this once. Stay away from them, withdraw from the Treasure Appraisal Convention, and leave the Yellow Court continent. Otherwise, I can't guarantee that you'll be able to leave alive. I'll only say this once. Think it over carefully. After he finished speaking, senior apprentice brother Yin didn't even give Lu Xiaoyi a chance to retort and directly left. He flew out of Guangqing Palace to continue his defensive mission, causing Lu Xiaoyi to be slightly baffled. His mouth was a bit foul, but he really didn't have any schemes towards the two women. However, since someone threatened him, he didn't mind teaching him a lesson. In his 300 years of cultivation, there really wasn't anyone who stretched their face out in front of his hand to ask for a slap. It was a very boring experience. He was only a great thief, and now that he caused such trouble, it meant that his career as a great thief wasn't successful. A true great thief should be a low-key existence, hiding in the crowd, and once he succeeded, he would flee thousands of miles away and not dawdling like this. He continued to walk in front of the two girls. Since they had already misunderstood him, then he might as well misunderstand them all at once. What did elder brother say to you? Inyu was very curious. Lu Xiaoyi smiled. Your brother told me to welcome you to the Yellow Court continent. The scenery here is even more beautiful, and he asked you to accompany me more. Inyu pursed her lips. How is that possible? Do you think I don't know my brother's temper? Did he threaten you? Lu Xiaoyi sighed. It's normal. If it was my sweetheart or girl who was being flirted with like this, I wouldn't even waste my breath. I'd just drag him out and feed him to the dogs. To be fair, you didn't do anything wrong. But in the world of cultivation, everything is not measured by right or wrong. Since you're in the circle, you know very well what you should do. Therefore, your future is still in your own hands. You don't need anyone to teach you what to do. Xiao Bingji said, You don't need anyone to teach you what to do. She had no feelings for eldest senior brother Ian, but at the same time, she hated this glib-tongued guy in front of her. He was a typical prodigal who didn't care about anything. He was really suitable for the true meaning of carefree travel. But there was one point. The true meaning of carefree travel was not only in one's state of mind, but also in one's strength. It wasn't something you could do as you pleased. Before Lu Xiaoyi could answer, Inyu was very dissatisfied. It's like this every time. Every time I have a new friend, you guys try to obstruct and threaten me. I'm in the same realm as you guys, so why can't I decide my own future? Xiao Bingji said softly, Because you're not reliable. If you could become a little more mature, do you think others would be willing to meddle in your business? Inyu wasn't willing to listen. She turned to Lu Xiaoyi. One ear. You're not really scared out of your wits just like that, are you? Elder brother is just scaring people. He used this method to scare away many people. Actually, he's very kind and abides by the rules. He doesn't attack people easily. Lu Xiaoyi frowned. Carefree travel is just a facade. Staying alive is the real thing. I've been in this world for a long time. I still understand this principle. Your elder brother isn't just talking. I'm afraid he'll really do something. I'm alone outside. It's really unwise for me to compete with the eldest senior brother of the local snake. I don't want to get into trouble before I can eat the fish. I'll say goodbye now. See you never again. He turned around and left without any reluctance. The two women were dumbfounded as they watched him leave. They had never thought that a man could be so brazen, so self-righteous, and so righteous. He didn't even say a word to show off. It was natural, and without a trace of anger. Did he see something? Inyu said softly. Xiao Bingji also frowned. Aya, your performance is the most natural expression of your character. It can't be seen through so easily, right? I don't have much experience in this area, but this is also good. There's no need to test this person anymore. He's either a glib-tongued scoundrel or an evil person. No matter which one he is, we can't tell. But you, on the other hand, make me worried. I'm afraid that your acting is too realistic and you'll sink yourself into it. So be it. Don't use this kind of method in the future. It'll harm others and yourself. The loss outweighs the gain. There was a tacit understanding between the two of them. The basis of their judgment was that if there was such a cunning thief hiding in the dark, would he use a method that they didn't expect to approach them? This was in line with the style of this thief. He always didn't take the usual path and liked to do unexpected things. There were nearly 1,000 Taoist practitioners. How could it be this person who approached them openly and not others? So the more harmless he appeared, the more worried the two of them were. Inyu was a little princess, but not every princess was spoiled since childhood. She also inherited the good bloodline of the family. The Yin family had countless descendants. How could she stand out and become the youngest and most promising Jean Dan? The old ancestor liked her not because of her appearance, but because of the potential she showed. Senior sister, you're thinking too much. How could I fall into a trap? I, Inya, am the one who dug a trap for others. But brother's really stupid. We didn't manage to trick this ear, but we tricked brother. If he didn't come and interfere, we would still have a lot of fun. Xiao Bingji looked at the night sky and said in disappointment, "Who is it? It's really hard to tell. It seems that other than relaxing our guard against the treasure, we have no other way. We thought that with our ability to see people, we could catch him before he made a move. Now it seems that we overestimated ourselves. Yeah, you're not allowed to get close to him. Although I can't be sure whether he's a thief or not. I can feel that this person is a dangerous person. Very dangerous. It's best to inform your brother. Forget it. Let's not tell him. With his temper, the more you tell him, the more he will go." Inya didn't understand. Why? Because he knows how to pretend? Xiao Bingji nodded and said seriously, "Yes, because he knows how to pretend. There are only two reasons for pretending. One is that he's really scared. The other is that he doesn't put us in his eyes at all. So he doesn't think that pretending in front of us is a loss of face. He treats us as nothing." Chapter 739. It's a pity that I haven't met such an interesting and strange person for a long time. Inya was very regretful. Xiao Bingji reminded her, when you find a person interesting and strange and keep trying to unravel this secret, this is often the first step to danger. Trust me, don't easily challenge your so-called Taoist heart. In the cultivation world, there are many people who suffer because of love. Do you think they're all casual people? There is something called love, and even the Taoist heart can't hide it. Lu Xiaoyi strolled leisurely in the crowd. He had to stop. If he continued to play this game, it would do no good to anyone. This was not playing hard to get. First of all, in the cultivation world, there were no idiots. If there were, then she must be using this appearance to hide something real. Even foundation establishment cultivators were like this, let alone Jean Dan. The little princess from family was spoiled and grew up drinking honey. She didn't know how to handle affairs and didn't understand the evil of people's hearts. This view was too presumptuous. There was no smooth road in the cultivation world. Everyone was the same, even the daughter of the emperor. He had never taken this arrogant little princess as his cup of tea. She was too troublesome, endless trouble. It was the same even if the lights were turned off. Why bother? He just wanted to know how the mysterious department of Huangting Taoism operated and where the threat to him stealing the 5 elements materials was. As long as he came into contact with her, there would be some leakage, but when Mr. Eanes suddenly appeared, he suddenly realized a problem. He could easily pull himself out of this kind of intellectual game because of his unique hobby. But could Inya do it? Although she had been acting, he could clearly feel that Inya's acting was slowly becoming more and more real. This was a dangerous signal. He didn't think that this woman was evil. She was playful, interesting, and a little clever, but it would bring about a different result. So he simply pretended to be a coward and left, but he didn't know if it was too late. This way of leaving was a bit stiff and unreasonable, but he really couldn't find a better way. Jokes aside, business is business. Standing in the middle of a group of cultivators who were discussing array discs, he was able to understand the foundation of this world's cultivators' understanding of array formation. This was the only thing that interested him slightly. What he didn't expect was that tonight was destined to be a day of harvest. A cultivator came to another circle not far from him, but his spiritual sense pointed directly at him. "Fellow Taoistian, how have you been?" Lu Xiaoyi didn't move at all. His mouth was discussing the Tao of array with others, but his consciousness quietly responded. "Only now did I notice you. There were too many people here. Are you interested in the treasures here too?" The voice laughed. "I'm not interested, but this body of mine is. Is fellow Taoist Qing Xian doing well? My strength was too weak to participate in the heaven and earth chessboard, but I was banished to another place. My body died and my soul was moved. Since then, I've been wandering all the way here. Now that I'm here, I can't help myself. It's all because of his friends." Lu Xiaoyi understood Yuhu's intentions. This was because the original friend of this body that he had seized had invited him to participate in this treasure appraisal convention. Indeed, it couldn't refuse because it was illogical. Yu's soul seizing was actually a very cruel thing to do to the victim. Even if he found a better body and left, it would still have a far-reaching impact on the victim. In light cases, the victim would lose their memories, and in severe cases, they would become confused. Yu didn't do it deliberately, but the soul seizing itself caused irreversible damage to the original body's soul. From his point of view, it wasn't wrong to say that Yu was evil. Fortunately, he could only seize the bodies of cultivators with weak spirits and weak wills. It was hard to find such cultivators in the 9 great sects, so he could only find them in the 3,000 side groups. It wasn't easy either. Qing Xian is not bad. He went to Tai Xian Middle Yellow. If you have time, you can go to Tai Xian. Maybe you can meet him. Yu laughed. I knew that the two of you would definitely be able to stay until the end. I won't go to Tai Xian for now, but I still have to be careful in the places of the big sections. The continent is too big, and we can only meet by chance. It's not good to do it deliberately. When we should meet, we will meet. It's not good to force it. Lu Xiaoyi nodded. Your attitude is very suitable. I'm in Carefree Travel, and I'm still in Carefree Mountain. I haven't been sent out alone. Do you know any places in the Carefree continent that you're familiar with? Yu was very gratified because this swordsman didn't deliberately alienate him. He was very clear about his own situation. To be honest, he was like a lonely spirit and couldn't be of much help. Normal spies wouldn't reveal their roots in front of him, but this swordsman was different. It wasn't easy for him to have a certain level of trust in an evil spirit, and he really treated him as a human. I haven't been to the Carefree continent before, and the continent is too big. I don't think it's safe to contact the 9 great sects. This is my personal opinion. Lu Xiaoyi didn't insist. After all, he had only been in the Zhou Xian upper realm for a short period of time, and his understanding of this place was far less than the natives, so he readily agreed. Do you have any good opinions? Yu had already made up his mind. He was very happy that his efforts didn't go to waste. There were millions of cultivators in the Zhou Xian upper realm, but there were only 2 who could treat an evil spirit like him as a friend. He didn't want to lose them, so he thought about it carefully. Little Lu, the safest places are actually those small continents. Because of their strength, their control over Little Lu isn't as strict as the continents. It's the best place to contact them. Red Hill continent is barren of resources, but because of this, business is abnormally developed. The cultivation sects on the continent don't have enough control, and the Chamber of Commerce system is gradually growing. Merchants, after all, are willing to do anything for spiritual stones and resources. Judging from the location of the spatial rift in Red Hill, it's also very close to the Carefree continent, so it's very convenient for us to travel. We can use the Chamber of Commerce in Red Hill to send messages. It's very confidential, and we'll leave our traces anonymously. No matter if it's you or me, if we need to, we can leave a message there. What do you think? Lu Xiaoyi gladly agreed. This was a good idea. The continents of the 9 great sects were really too big, and it was indeed inconvenient to contact them. All right, that's how it is. However, the message can't be left openly. We need to add a layer of password. Like this, like this, like this, like this, do you understand? Yu sighed in admiration. How can others decipher such a secret code? Even if we engrave it in public, others won't be able to see through it. This is the best. Lu Xiaoyi's encryption wasn't anything new. It was just like the spy movies in his previous life. It was just finding a book, such as the most common Taoist scriptures, and then using numbers to replace the words. There were countless Taoist scriptures in the cultivation world. So how could people who didn't know the true meaning behind it? Since we've met today, do you have any requests that I can help you with? Lu Xiaoyi was still very concerned about this evil spirit. Although its strength wasn't high and he couldn't use it in battle, its special ability could help him in other aspects. He didn't have any helpers in the Zhou Xian upper realm, so he really needed an errand runner that he could trust completely. Chapter 740. Yu was very pleased to hear this. This was a form of mutual assistance, letting him know that he was not alone in this world. What request do I have? At least not for the time being. But Brother Yin, I came here for a purpose, not just to view the treasures. There might be changes in the treasure appraisal conference in a few days. You have to be careful. Lu Xiaoyi was very surprised. Changes? Don't tell me you want to lay your hands on these treasures? Yu laughed. Why not? In the Zhou upper realm, stealing resources is very common among the 3,000 unorthodox groups. It's just that it's relatively rare in the 9 continents, but it's not without precedent. If the temptation is big enough, there's nothing that unorthodox cultivators don't dare to do. Lu Xiaoyi asked, Aren't you afraid of revenge? Can you escape? Yu disagreed. We don't know who did it, and where did the revenge come from? Among the treasure-viewing cultivators here, other than the 9 great upper sects, how many unorthodox cultivators use their real names? It's not to do anything. It's the most basic self-defense method for unorthodox cultivators. As for escaping, cats have their own ways. As long as the Huang, Qingdao, Yuaning doesn't get involved, it's not a big problem. The continent is too big, and there are countless directions. It's very troublesome to chase after them. Who asked the Huang, Qingdao to be so arrogant, holding some treasure appraisal conference here? They've probably been living peacefully for too long, so they've forgotten to be vigilant. Lu Xiaoyi didn't stand on ceremony. Was there such a good thing? If he didn't take what the heavens gave him, he would be guilty. Since there was a group doing this, he didn't mind doing a double cross. What a coincidence. I also want to lay my hands on the treasures. It's just that the security is loose on the inside and tight on the outside. It's not easy for me to do it alone. What kind of rules do you have? Let me see if there's any possibility of double-crossing. Yu laughed. It wasn't his own idea to do this, but the body he'd snatched was a member of the group. The group was very strict, and the division of labor was clear. If he didn't come, he would be suspected. Because he couldn't find another good body, he could only reluctantly do this. To it, adding some trouble to these so-called visitors was its main way of doing things, so it didn't reject it. After all, with its true strength, it couldn't do anything. In any case, these treasures would never end up in its hands. Furthermore, it was useless for an evil spirit like it to have these treasures. There was nowhere to hide them. Since he was also a thief, he might as well steal for his friends. Sure, their plan is like this. Brother Yin, take a look. This is the best opportunity to strike. In addition, this is only the initial stage of the plan. You should know that there are no fixed rules for this kind of thing. If there are any changes, I will inform you immediately. The two of them quickly came up with a plan. One of them wanted to rob from the outside, while the other was a spy. Lu Xiaoyi found it strange. The treasure appraisal convention was held so suddenly, yet this group of people came at such a coincidence. Could it be that you've been gathering here for a long time and are plotting something? Yugu nodded. That's right. His original target was a big shop. However, that place was temporarily occupied by Yuaning, so it wasn't easy to strike. Coincidentally, it was the treasure appraisal convention, so everyone came to take a look. After more than 10 days, I felt that the situation was more or less clear, so I decided to strike when the third batch of treasures was revealed. Lu Xiaoyi continued to ask, The Huangting Taoism is set up for a purpose. Do you know that? Yugu chuckled. Of course we know. Those who come here are the ancestors of thieves, the old thieves. In the upper realm of Zhou, they're the famous wildebeest bandits. How could they not see through this? The Guangqing Palace is loose on the inside and tight on the outside. There are more than 100 people outside, including the eldest senior brother of the Yellow Court sect. He thinks that he can settle everything with a wing-tip shuttle. We have people outside as well, so they can't hide from our observation. Brother Yin, the Guangqing Palace isn't set up like this just to take your treasures. Is it? Yugu finally reacted. Lu Xiaoyi didn't deny it. That's right. That's why I can't act rashly. I thought that I would have to delay it for a while, but I didn't expect you to have the same plan. The ancient bandits were especially suitable to live in a place like this that was a mixture of more than 3,000 continents. This was because even the 9 great upper sects couldn't purge all the side doors. Their experience in this line of work was like the orthodoxy of a sect, which was passed down from generation to generation. In comparison, a sect organization like the small vestibule had to face a wider range of situations. Their focus was on fighting, but they were fundamentally different from the ancient bandits when it came to the specialization of burglary. It wasn't something that Lu Xiaoyi, who was a second-rate bandit, could compare to. Things that were difficult in Lu Xiaoyi's eyes were very normal in the eyes of the bandits. They had specializations in their field, and they paid particular attention to coordination and cooperation. They were methodical when it came to advancing and retreating. Daring to strike in the Yellow Court continent wasn't an impulsive action, but a choice made after a long period of planning. For example, in terms of retreating, they'd made appropriate arrangements since long ago. Originally, it was for the sake of plundering shops, but now, it was being used to plunder the treasure appraisal meeting. The choice of time was sufficient to display the professionalism of the bandits. They didn't choose the first or second batch because they hadn't completely understood the situation. They didn't seize the last batch because the organizer would always put in extra effort in the final phase and strive to finish what they started. The third batch was extremely profound, and it was a type of psychological strategy. Which floor are you focusing on? I've taken a fancy to the 5-element spirit artifacts on the 3rd floor. If you want to seize medicinal pills and talismans, then it's meaningless for me to take advantage of you, asked Lu Xiaoyi. Yugu smiled. Don't worry, Brother Yin. How could a bandit group give up a large profit for a small profit? Amongst the treasures on the 3rd floor, only the top floor is the most valuable, so it's naturally the first choice of the bandits. As for the 1st and 2nd floor, it depends on the situation at that time, and we won't persist in taking all the treasures. There are too many cultivators in the Guangqing Palace, so we won't have much time to act. Therefore, it's highly likely that we'll retreat after we succeed on the 3rd floor. As a professional bandit group, we won't put ourselves in a dangerous situation. You don't have to worry about this. Lu Xiaoyi mocked himself. All right, I'm just worrying about my profession as an amateur. It's completely unnecessary. Yugu was a little excited because this originally insignificant operation had added something that he was interested in. However, he felt that he could still do something more. Brother Yin, I see that you're always together with that Huang Tinkuan cultivator. Isn't it a little interesting? I can help with this kind of thing. That woman surnamed Xia's divine soul is too strong. I can't seize her body, but Inya can. Why don't I find a chance to control her? Then, I can enjoy her for you, Brother Yin. Lu Xiaoyi almost cursed it out loud. Go, go, go. Do you think that I'm the same as you? Do you think that I'm used to being admired in amber? If you seize her body, will that woman still be the original her? If a slightly normal person knew who the person in front of them was, I'm afraid that they wouldn't be able to have sex. Moreover, that woman isn't as simple as you think. Don't think about these useless things. You better think more about yourself. Don't put yourself in danger during the robbery. If that happens, you'll have to find another body. Chapter 741. Lu Xiaoyi didn't see Inya again during these few days, and this was a pretty good outcome. Everyone was slightly embarrassed from playing games, and this wasn't a good sign. He liked to joke around, but he was even more clear of his bottom line. If you didn't have this intention, then you shouldn't go over and tease people. From the perspective of the sect, Inya didn't do anything wrong, and she was only doing her duty. Just like if a similar situation occurred in Xinyuan, he would do it himself. He still hoped that the life of cultivation was simpler and didn't involve too many other things. This wasn't Mount E, nor was it the Dome. He had no relatives here, and he even had a great responsibility. He didn't want to cause a grudge between cultivation and being a spy. The treasure appraisal convention continued, and it quickly arrived at the 3rd stage. To the spirit weapon treasures on the 3rd floor, the treasures displayed in the 3rd batch were also spirit weapons of the 5 elements: metal, wood, water, fire, and earth. But if he waited until the 4th batch, then the 5 elements would be incomplete, and he would lose the greatest benefit if he made a move. From the plan of the bandits that Yuhu told him, he knew that there were 13 bandits in the Guangqing Palace this time, and there were a few more outside the palace to provide support, so their preparations could be said to be insufficient. But even with such a number of people, if they wanted to succeed under the strict protection of the Golden Hall Court sect, they could only deal with a single person on a single floor, and it was impossible for them to make a move against the treasures on all 3 floors at the same time. He moved between the first and third floor as usual, and at the same time, he inadvertently observed those people that might be the true bandits. Unfortunately, he actually didn't notice a single one. Professionalism was professionalism. With an impeccable identity and a flawless plan, they were naturally Dafa's words and actions. They were the true bandits, and they disguised themselves as ordinary cultivators and would be invisible if they were thrown into a crowd. They weren't overly ostentatious, nor were they unusually low-key. Compared to them, Lu Xiaoyi's performance as a Grand Bandit was a failure. Although he didn't reveal his intentions as a Grand Bandit from the beginning until the end, his name had always been on the list of Golden Hall realm cultivators that were focused on observation, and this itself was extremely unprofessional. He understood this point very well now, and he'd always been considering if he should change his profession. He might as well not be a Grand Bandit and directly rob. On the 4th day of the 3rd batch, this was the appointed time for the bandits to take action. Lu Xiaoyi had already received the latest information from Yu Hu. He had also made his final preparations for this. This might be the last day of the treasure appraisal, so he was not in the mood to play around until the end. Sit and watch as the Golden Hall realm cultivators become flustered and exasperated. I'll watch the fire burn from the other side of the river. In a cultivation world, if a big force wanted to, they would definitely be able to get what they wanted. Nothing was flawless, especially for a guy like him who was not clean to begin with. Early in the morning, he still went to the 3rd floor to observe the 5 element spirit tools. The earth-splitting tablet that was fused with the Heavenman stone, the distant halberd that was fused with the grand white gold, the pure jade bottle that was fused with the first heaven water, the wood kite that was fused with the builder wood, and the fierce wind flag that was fused with the sun's true flame. They were all good things. Not only were there precious first-rank 5 elements materials, there were also top-notch forging techniques. Unfortunately, when it came to him, the forging techniques were going to be destroyed. It was also a reckless waste of natural resources. The crowd was still bustling with activity. Everyone gathered around the spirit artifacts they were interested in, observing and discussing. Lu Xiaoyi felt that someone was approaching him, so he sighed. After my elder brother's threat, you really don't even dare to say anything? Inya looked at him, but there was no jumping around in her eyes like before. Instead, she seemed very calm. This was what Lu Xiaoyi was most afraid to see. The true meaning of being carefree is to eat peaches if you can. If there is a monkey protecting you, then leave. The most taboo is to linger and not go. A dull life may indeed be very boring, but if you really get sucked into the whirlpool, then you will realize how precious peace is to a cultivator. Everyone has their own life. The worst mentality is to be tired of your own life, but to envy others. When you envy others, do you know that there are many people who are also envious of you? Inya looked at him with her big eyes. You used to be sloppy, but now you have become a thinker. What will you become in the future? Lu Xiaoyi said softly, I like chameleons, because they can always change their color according to the environment they are in. It's the same for cultivators. The kind of me you want to see depends on the kind of environment I am in. Inya didn't give up. She used to do it for the sect, but now she did it for herself. Sister Bing was right. When a woman starts to be curious about a man, this is the beginning of danger. She could sense the danger, but she couldn't stop. We are both in the Guanqing Palace. We could still joke and chat before, but now we are like passers-by. Has the environment changed? Lu Xiaoyi was very direct. It has changed. Inya was confused. I can't tell. Lu Xiaoyi reminded her. So you don't understand this world and the people around you. You don't understand, but you rashly get involved. This is the beginning of trouble. Inya tilted her head. Understanding always needs a process. From not knowing anything to slowly understanding. If I am worried about the trouble in the process of understanding, then I don't understand anything. Cultivators shouldn't be like this, right? There was no way to talk about this. The worst thing had happened. This woman seemed to have the urge to understand him. The problem was he someone who could bear to be understood? Seeing that Lu Xiaoyi didn't speak, Inya didn't let him go. One ear, are we friends? If we are, please tell me. Is it because my brother's actions have hurt you? Lu Xiaoyi was very distressed. He felt that he was about to be exposed. Facing a woman who was starting to get serious, there were some things that he couldn't lie to her about. In the end, he was just an incompetent thief. He couldn't destroy his conscience. It has nothing to do with your brother. If possible, you'd better persuade him. It is really dangerous to compete with a passerby like me who has no enemies. He should be less impulsive and more tolerant. How good would it be to be obedient as his senior brother? Inyu was very curious. Why do you say you have no enemies? Your mouth is so smelly. Shouldn't you have enemies all over the world? Lu Xiaoyi said seriously, I have no enemies because my enemies are all dead. Inyu laughed. When this guy threatened people, he was still very serious. Seeing him turn and leave, she couldn't help but use her divine sense to ask one last question. One ear. I am Inyu now, my own Inyu, not Huang Ting's Inyu. Tell me, are you that thief? Lu Xiaoyi didn't even turn his head. I am. Inyu was so angry that she stomped her feet. She knew this guy would answer like this. Then, was he really that thief? She actually didn't have an answer in her heart. Why did she hope that he was the thief? Was it because in this way, she would have more opportunities to interact with him? What was wrong with her? It seemed a little strange. Chapter 742. At noon, Lu Xiaoyi finally saw the identity of the bandits. There were a few ordinary cultivators who had started to gather on the third floor. This was definitely not all of them, but before they took action, for someone like him who had completely grasped the timing of their actions, he could still see some clues. They would take action directly on the third floor. If it were an inexperienced bandit, they might choose to first create chaos on the first floor, then create a dispute on the second floor, and finally take action on the third floor. It sounded like a very thorough plan, but in the current environment of Guangxing Palace, doing so would be like taking off one's pants and releasing one's breath. It was an unnecessary move. The people of the Yellow Court were already prepared, so no matter where the chaos occurred, they would immediately collect the treasures in their hands and lose the opportunity. The bandit group's plan was to do the opposite, starting from the third floor, then moving to the first and second floor, creating chaos as a whole. Lu Xiaoyi could not leave the third floor, at least not during the robbery. This was because this was the only time when they could make a move in the midst of the chaos. That was what both he and Yugu thought. After leaving Guangxing Palace, with Lu Xiaoyi's strength, it might be possible for him to snatch the treasures by force. But once he did, he would definitely become the target of public criticism, and there would be no point in doing things secretly. The exchange of spiritual weapons on the third floor was very lively, and there would often be cultivators taking out their own spiritual weapons to compare with the treasures on display. This was normal, but it was also because the bandit group had been going up one by one for the past few days to exchange spiritual weapons. They had to create such an illusion that the exchange was lively, and the participating cultivators were all excited. They had to artificially create a false atmosphere, all for the sake of making their move today. They had tried all 5 of the cultivators on display, just to find the most careless one. For example, the current owner of the Zephyr flag. Every treasure owner was told that there might be bandits at the treasure appraisal convention, and they were asked to retrieve their treasures at the first moment if an accident happened. But everyone was different. Because of their personality, because of their strength, because of their trust in the sect, there would be differences in the degree of importance they placed on the treasures. How to differentiate? It was a test by the members of the pirate group. They would take the initiative to communicate with each other using their own spirit tools. Then, through some small actions and words during the process of communication, they would judge whether the exhibitor was being careful or careless. The owner of the Zephyr flag was carefree. He himself had some strength and really wanted to see what sort of person the great thief was. Moreover, he trusted those fellow disciples of his in the small vestibule very much, and he'd even heard of the arrangements the Golden Hall realm cultivators had set up outside the Guangxing Palace. So, he didn't think that there would be someone capable of seizing the treasures before him. Even if it was done, how could the person escape the inescapable net of the Golden Hall realm cultivators. When another spirit tool slowly approached him, he naturally assumed that it was another cultivator who wanted to communicate with him, so he didn't take any precautions. This was a small cauldron. It was ordinary, and its power of the 5 elements was ordinary. Just as he was about to open his mouth and laugh at how he dared to compare this thing here, a sudden change occurred. The small cauldron flipped, and a spatial energy abruptly emerged, enveloping an area of over 100 meters in circumference. Instantly, the outside and the outside of the space were separated by yin and yang. Within the space were the 5 exhibitors and the other treasure hunters that were too close, whereas the 5 treasures were isolated outside. The small cauldron was called the Heaven-Overturning Cauldron, and it separated people and not objects. The goal of the pirate group was to cut off the connection between the treasures and their owners at the first possible moment. The time would be very short, because Jindan Spirit Tool was unable to create a large area and long-term spatial barrier. But the cooperation of the pirate group was abnormally skilled, and they were all veterans. At practically the same time, the other 2 spirit tools were successively activated. One was a spiritual storm impact. Its strength was very limited, and the damage it caused to cultivators could only be described as weak. But the impact produced from it would affect the cultivator's divine sense and carry a sound and light effect. If it was in the wild, a cultivator could even turn a blind eye to this degree of impact when facing an enemy alone. But it was different here. This was a narrow indoor space. You didn't have more or less enemies in the cultivation world. In the Guangqing Palace, all sorts of disagreements could be found everywhere. When divine sense and vision perception lost their effect under a sudden change, the first reaction of a cultivator was to leave. This wasn't a matter of being startled. It was a good habit of self-protection. If a cultivator didn't have this habit, if they were still standing there like wooden pegs, they would sooner or later die in the traps that were everywhere in the cultivation world. The moment the spiritual storm impact was unleashed, it was like a group of little chicks that had their nest blown open. In order to guard against a possible sneak attack from others, there would definitely be people who would choose to quickly escape. A portion of them would escape, forcing the remaining people to have no choice but to escape, because they would feel that there were shadows in front of them and behind them. If you foolishly stayed in the same spot, would you be training your wooden pegs? The quality of the cultivators who came were all very high, which also meant that their reaction to escaping was very fast. Only by escaping would they be able to observe what was happening in the end. They wouldn't be able to see clearly what was happening before escaping. This was the first principle of a cultivator when encountering danger in the outside world, and it couldn't be reversed. The pirate group made use of this point and purposely blew up the group. Of course, the reason why the effect was so good was because there were a few hidden bandits who were deliberately leading the tempo. They ran away in a panic and, at the same time, defended their upper bodies. With weapons in hand, they pretended to be under attack. Yugu was one of them. His position in the pirate group was limited, and he wasn't able to play a very important role. This was also because of his relatively low strength. The one who really made the move was someone else, and it was a snakeskin bag. This wasn't the magical weapon that Lu Xiaoyi used to carry around when he was working in his previous life, but a real cultivation weapon. It was a piece of snakeskin left behind after a space flying serpent was killed and was made into a sharp weapon by cultivators to block out divine sense detection. If a worker wants to do a good job, he must first sharpen his tools. The group of people in the pirate group didn't rely on their combat strength to make a name for themselves in the martial world. Combat strength was only one aspect, but they were even more skilled in the field of professionalism. Not only did they have soft strength, experience, planning, and unimaginable imagination, they also had hard strength and all kinds of extremely professional stealing equipment. For example, the 3 spiritual weapons that they use today, with perfect coordination, they were able to brazenly commit crimes in front of hundreds of people, without hurting anyone, and still able to achieve their goal. This was the true pinnacle of stealing. For example, this snakeskin bag, there was a professional cut in the pirate group. The bag. The purpose was to take away the stolen goods without anyone noticing, so that all traces of auras would be ineffective. Even if the owner was right in front of him, he wouldn't be able to detect the aura of his own treasures. With this item, the pirate group could complete the last step and how to safely retreat. Otherwise, if they left behind a trail of aura that would be followed by others, how could they still be considered a top pirate group? The snakeskin bag rose in the air, and with a suction of the snake's head, all 5 treasures flew into the bag in an instant and shrank into its shape. The user was about to reach out to grab it, but at this moment, a sharp gust of wind attacked him. Chapter 743. The third floor was in chaos, and, at the same time, the second floor and first floor were in chaos as well. But the bandits that made a move here were mainly in chaos and didn't really make a move. They didn't have enough manpower, and if they were narrow-minded, then they might be taken down on the spot. The quality of this group of bandits was extremely high, and the bandits that were in charge of providing support below weren't moved in the slightest by the dazzling array of treasures. They only made a ruckus and caused the entire Guanqing Palace to be even more chaotic. But all the chaotic crowd didn't include the masters, especially the cultivators of the small vestibule. As the person that set up the trap, they only left a little over 40 Jin Dan cultivators in the Guanqing Palace. There were less than 10 on the first and second floors, a few in the plaza outside the palace, and less than 20 on the third floor. With a flip of the tiny cauldron, the cultivators that were comparatively close to the treasures were temporarily flipped to another isolated space, and this included the Golden Hall treasure appraisers, treasure holders, and Outerland treasure viewers. It also included a portion of the small vestibule Jin Dan cultivators that were guarding. There were over 10 of them, and the absent-minded Enya was amongst them. This was equivalent to more than half of the small vestibule cultivators on the third floor losing their usefulness. But there were still 6 or 7 small vestibule cultivators that didn't approach to protect the treasures, and they instead stood far away outside the viewing circle and were in charge of full surveillance. There were still over 100 cultivators like this, and for various reasons, they were chatting, taking a breather, unwilling to join in the fun, or some fake bandit that clearly knew what would happen. All of this came extremely suddenly, and it was sudden to the point most people didn't have the time to react. When the space flipped, the spirit explosion had already unfolded, and it was targeted precisely at these cultivators that stayed on the outer layer of the third floor. Most people were floating out, but the small vestibule cultivators were instead fighting for the treasures. This was their duty, and even if they might encounter unfathomable danger, they still had to do this. It was also at this instant that a Golden Hall realm cultivator saw the snakeskin pouch, and then he instinctively launched an attack towards the person controlling it. Not more than 2 breaths of time had passed since the space flipped until now. This was the challenge issued by the most ancient bandit group towards a formidable sect, even though their strengths were utterly incomparable. But in this kind of time, in this kind of environment, and under each other's objectives, the Golden Hall realm cultivators really might not be able to gain any advantage. When facing an attack, the bandit that placed the snakeskin pouch wasn't afraid, nor did he receive the attack. He just turned around and fled. This caused the few people present to be slightly puzzled. He's in panic to the point he doesn't even want his loot? It's not like this, because the snakeskin bag did not only belong to one person. Instead, it was a spiritual artifact that belonged to all the bandits. In other words, anyone could take it. At that moment, there were still a few bandits on the third floor who were making a ruckus. Yu was one of them. The snakeskin bag searched for its owner, but was intercepted by the cultivators of the small vestibule several times. They couldn't stop the snakeskin bag, and were also afraid that attacking it would destroy the treasures inside. Therefore, they all attacked the bandits, and it was a mess. Only 3 breaths had passed. The cultivators of the small vestibule were intercepting the bandits, but they couldn't tell who the real bandits were. This was because other than the bandits, there were also a few cultivators from the outer continent who remained at the scene. It was unknown whether their reflexes were too slow or if they had ulterior motives. It was also unknown whether they were helping Huang Ting or thinking of taking advantage of the situation, including Lu Xiaoyi. He had already unsheathed his sword, but he maintained the lowest level of intensity. The targets of his sword were all cultivators who wanted to obtain the snakeskin pouch, until Yugu finally rushed towards the snakeskin pouch. This fellow's strength was truly a little weak. Only now did he find an opportunity. If he continued to dawdle, Lu Xiaoyi suspected that someone would notice something. Yugu successfully obtained the snakeskin pouch. This was because only when he made a move, Lu Xiaoyi wouldn't deliberately stop him. Furthermore, he didn't mind the spell of another cultivator from the small vestibule. Of course, he didn't mind. After all, it was someone else's body. When he obtained the snakeskin pouch, his body was sent flying by the spell and smashed into the wall of the palace, creating a big hole. However, he didn't hesitate to flip over the wall and jump out of Guangxing Palace. Outside the palace, it wasn't as chaotic as he imagined. This was because Xia Bingji was there. She didn't stay in Guangxing Palace. Instead, she stayed in the square outside the palace. As the leader, the person in charge, her position shouldn't be on the front line fighting and killing. Instead, she should be in charge of the overall situation. As long as no one broke through Guangxing Palace's spell formation, as long as everyone was there, the treasures and the bandits wouldn't run away. Now it would seem that there wasn't a single bandit, but a group of bandits. At the critical moment, she displayed her extraordinary ability to control the situation. Under her command, a few tens of cultivators from the small vestibule acted as the middleman, and the few hundreds of Golden Hall realm cultivators present acted in unison. They'd basically finished organizing all the cultivators that came from outside Guangxing Palace in a few tens of breaths of time. Almost 1,000 cultivators had already faintly taken shape, and they didn't panic any longer as they silently waited for the members of the bandits to jump out from within. This was the accomplishment of Golden Hall realm cultivators, and it was also the cooperation of the other cultivators from the outer continent. They were all cultivators at the level of Jindan, figures that had experienced the dangers of the cultivation world for a long time. So how could they be stupid? As soon as they jumped out of Guangxing Palace, they instantly understood what exactly had happened within the palace. They hated the bandits for being arrogant and hated that a proper treasure appraisal was interrupted, so there was utterly no one that didn't cooperate. They knew, too, clearly in their hearts that whoever didn't cooperate now would surely be the first target of suspicion by the Huangting Taoism. A few bandits jumped out just like this, under the gazes of everyone. The matter originally wasn't so troublesome. Within Guangxing Palace, according to their plan, they originally should have obtained that snakeskin pouch long ago, but there was a crafty swordsman on the third floor that had spoiled their collection numerous times. If it wasn't for their last companion disregarding his life, they would have thought that the mission would have failed, but now they still had a chance. Lu Xiaoyi stood at the entrance of the cave that Yugu had smashed open and didn't rashly go out. Behind him, the energy of space exploded, and the few hundred cultivators that were swept into space appeared. They were very disciplined and didn't shout and kill as soon as they came out, but instead stood silently. Obviously, Inya and a portion of the Golden Hall realm cultivators have played a key role in this. They were deeply aware of the purpose of the bandits using spatial techniques, and if they flew around randomly after coming out, it would instead create an opportunity for the bandits to escape. The few small vestibule cultivators that stayed on the third floor came over to greet them, and with a flash of their divine sense, they'd already clearly explained everything that had happened outside. Since no one had been able to escape until now, then everything was under control. Inya noticed Lu Xiaoyi, who stood at the entrance of the cave, and she walked over and said angrily, "Bandit One Ear, why aren't you running?" Lu Xiaoyi pursed his lips and said, "Look at this battle formation. I'm not stupid. Would I run out and be beaten into mincemeat?" Inya looked outside. Close to 1,000 Jindan had tightly surrounded the entire Guangxing Palace, and not even a drop of water could leak out. A voice was still shouting, "The bandits inside, listen up. You've already been surrounded. If you stop now, there's still room for negotiation. Otherwise, under the lightning, all will be turned into chaos. The life of cultivation is short. Don't say that you didn't warn us. Chapter 744. Because they'd already controlled the situation, the Golden Hall realm cultivators seemed to be neither hurried nor slow, as they'd already confirmed that there were at least over 10 cultivators participating in this robbery. Swarming forward now wasn't a smart method, because they weren't sure if there were still accomplices of the bandits hidden in the formation outside. Time truly passed too quickly, and only a few tens of breaths had passed until now. Now stability was everything. Next, they'd transfer all the elite teams formed from Golden Hall realm cultivators to attack the bandits, and this required coordination. Most importantly, all the elite forces of the small vestibule were still a few tens of kilometers away and were rushing over. Once they arrived, the outcome would be decided. Do you think you'll be able to wash away your suspicions by staying here? So long as it was someone that stayed on the third floor at that time, all of them had the possibility of being part of the bandits, including you. Inu was joking, but the other small vestibule cultivators by her side obviously didn't understand the true relationship between them and were at the stage of making trouble for no reason. A cultivator argued, "Junior Sister Ian, you were separated into space at that time and weren't present, so you might not understand. At that time, if it wasn't for this fellow Taoist single ear lending a hand, these bandits would probably have obtained that snakeskin pouch a few breaths in advance. At that time, our arrangements outside hadn't taken shape yet, so he's meritorious towards this incident." The other small vestibule law enforcers that were present at the scene nodded in succession. This was the Golden Court sect style, seeking truth from facts, yet not making false accusations. Inya felt extremely bored. These fellows really don't have the slightest discerning ability. Can't they discern that I'm joking? Yet she wasn't willing to admit defeat. So what? Wasn't it still the bandits that seized the snakeskin pouch? All the cultivators were speechless. Junior Sister Ian had activated her unreasonable pestering mode, and that was something that no one could stop. Inya was extremely curious as she looked at the two bandits below, supporting a heavily injured person and retreating into the first floor of Guangqing Palace. What were they doing? Could it be that they still want to defend to the death based on this? I feel that 13 people have already gathered on the first floor. Is this all of them? What are they waiting for? What can they wait for? Their earlier robberies were breathtaking, yet the outcome is like this? How are they going to run? Although they were on the third floor, they didn't dare to rush in without Xia Bingji's orders. The situation now was like meat on the chopping board. They only needed to decide when to cut. They just needed to guard the entrance of the third floor. Lu Xiaoyi sighed. How else can we run? Fly out or spread out? It doesn't seem possible to fly out, so we can only set up temporary teleportation, but temporary teleportation won't be able to travel far, so we can only wait for your arrangements outside to be withdrawn. You bastard! Why didn't you say so earlier? Lu Xiaoyi said innocently, I just thought of it. I'm not a god. Inya was shocked. She immediately sent a message to her senior sister Xia Bingji with her divine sense and led people to rush down. It was too late. Just as Lu Xiaoyi's voice faded, a spatial ripple came from the first floor of Guangqing Palace. Inya and Xia Bingji's group had just rushed into the first floor when the spatial array flashed. Not even a hair could be seen. Spatial teleportation was an extremely difficult spirit design. Even for Jean Dan, it was difficult, but cultivators always had a way to deal with it. For example, they could set up the components of the spatial array in advance and instantly assemble them. This method was meaningless in the eyes of most people because this teleportation distance was only a few tens of kilometers. If they had the time to set it up, it might not be as fast as flying. But it was suitable for a group of bandits because it could help them escape the encirclement and blockade of a large group of cultivators. They didn't teleport immediately because they knew that the Huangting Taoism had set up an ambush a few tens of kilometers away. But if they appeared here, those ambushing cultivators would surely return to reinforce them. If they teleported now, they would be too far away. Without the slightest hesitation, Xia Bingji's expression was heavy as she gave the order. The few hundred Golden Hall realm cultivators scattered and pursued in all directions. A few tens of kilometers was far from a safe distance for Jean Dan. So long as they were high up in the sky, they would be able to see them clearly. At this point, the encirclement that the Huangting Taoism had painstakingly set up had completely dissipated. Some cultivators that were close to the Huangting Taoism went up to help, whereas some cowardly cultivators naturally slipped away and were powerless to control the situation any longer. Lu Xiaoyi, of course, belonged to the category of people who would run away. No one accompanied him in his flirting, and even Enya had to prioritize the overall situation now as they each followed their own groups to search. The remaining 200 to 300 cultivators instead dispersed in an uproar. In the distance, a large flying vessel flashed past in the northwest direction, and there was no need to think about it to know that it was surely the backup plan of the bandits. Now, there would be a chance to pursue them. Lu Xiaoyi swiftly flew towards the entrance of the rift. Now wasn't the time to pretend to be a big shot. After the Huangting Taoism recovered from their shock, they would surely settle accounts with the cultivators that had participated in the treasure appraisal convention this time. They would get to the bottom of everything and carefully replay every single scene that had occurred at that time, so he might not be able to avoid their deep investigation. It was still those words. When the target of suspicion was pointed at him, then no matter what he did, he would be unable to wash himself of it. He could only leave while the Golden Hall realm cultivators were still in the process of pursuing the bandits, and the news hadn't been sent back to the rift passageway. As he flew, he took out a piece of amber, and a virtual shadow floated out from it and flew side by side with him. Yugu, I'm probably going to travel to various continents to broaden my horizons, and the first stop should be Taishan Central Yellow to see if I can contact that fellow Qing Xian. No matter what, the three of us still have to establish a connection. What about you? Are you going to leave with me? Or do you have your own matters to attend to? It's inconvenient for you to move in your current state. Do you want me to help you find a body? The virtual shadow thought for a moment, but still rejected. Forget it. I'm used to drifting alone, and I do have some matters to attend to in my hometown, so I won't accompany you to Taishan Central Yellow. You don't have to worry about the matter of my body. My difficulty lies in finding a powerful Jean Dan. It's very difficult, but ordinary Jean Dan is a piece of cake to me, so I won't need your help. Yugu was slightly proud, but Lu Xiaoyi didn't mind. Do you have any difficulties with the matters in your hometown? I'm free now anyway, so I can go wherever I want. Yugu was very grateful. It's all a small matter. I can handle myself. If there's really a big matter in the future, I'll ask, and I won't be pretentious. This time the bandits suffered a great loss and fled, but they still have a few strongholds in the Golden Hall realm, and some resources are stored there. I have to go and get them. They'll be useful. Lu Xiaoyi said seriously, I have an extra reach halberd with me from the 5 Elements materials here, and it's worth a lot. Since you lack resources, do you want to sell it? Originally, we're working together, so we should split the loot equally, but I need these, and it's very difficult for me to have another chance. Yugu interrupted him. The things I lack are different from what you lack, so they don't match. Moreover, how would I dare to sell a treasure like the Reach Halberd? Wouldn't I be looking for trouble? Don't worry, if there's really a need, I'll ask. Let's part ways here. The mountains are high and the rivers are long. We'll meet again someday. Chapter 745. Lu Xiaoyi was flying alone, and he couldn't help but sigh with emotion at this fortuitous encounter. He really didn't expect that such a difficult journey to find the materials of the 5 elements would be completed so easily by the bandits. The key to his and Yugu's plan was to let Yugu get the snakeskin pouch. If they snatched it from other bandits, they would lose the purpose of concealing themselves, and it would become an open robbery. Therefore, when the snakeskin pouch contained the 5 treasures of the 5 elements, the cultivator who cast the spell would definitely not be able to get it. Even if the small vestibule enforcer didn't do anything, Lu Xiaoyi would. The next step was also to achieve the same goal. They needed to control Yugu until he took over the snakeskin pouch. This was the most uncontrollable stage of the whole plan, because Yugu's ability was limited. It was inevitable that Yugu would be under the spell, and he was willing to do it, because it was impossible for everything to go smoothly without exposing themselves. He also didn't want to stay among the bandits forever, so he wanted to use this chance to escape. Therefore, he acted very fearlessly, as if he would rather be injured than to get the snakeskin pouch. The small vestibule spell was not so easy to deal with, and this was within Yuhu's expectations. When he was pierced through the palace wall, he had already extinguished the self-transporting spiritual formation on the snakeskin pouch and conveniently stuffed the pouch into the broken jade. At the same time, he controlled this body to jump down, and at the same time, his demonic main body escaped and quickly hid in the amber to prevent others from seeing through the essence of his soul body. At that time, it was too chaotic and the environment was too noisy. There were waves of spells, spatial waves, and spiritual waves. The flying sword consciously covered him, so no one saw the soul body of the bandit who got the snakeskin pouch. However, this situation couldn't last long, so he had to hide himself in the amber to completely conceal his existence. In such a complicated environment, if the amber was picked up by others, their life and death would be controlled by others. At that time, Lu Xiaoyi had to come and clean up the mess. He quickly came to the hole in the palace wall, pretending to be a ghost who was observing the situation, but in fact he was picking up the amber and the snakeskin pouch. He had completed the substitution. The body of the bandit who was possessed was already severely injured, and now there was a big problem with his mental state. His survival was slim, but this was no longer a problem for the two of them to consider. Stealing a beam and replacing it with a pillar, like a cicada shedding its carapace. It was perfect at the time, but it couldn't stand up to scrutiny. The bandits would soon discover that they didn't succeed. If they weren't captured, then for the sake of protecting their reputation, this secret might be kept a secret forever. But if they were captured by Golden Hall Realm cultivators, then the Golden Hall Realm cultivators would quickly trace back the entire process, and Lu Xiaoyi's role in this seemed to be slightly thought-provoking. Even if it was impossible for a true monarch to personally handle this matter, as long as a simple deduction was made, how was it that one ear was able to stand at the farthest point when space was flipped over without being affected? Why was he able to control himself when a spiritual explosion happened? Why did he help the golden person interceptor? Why was he able to predict the bandits' plan? If his heart was with Huang Ting, why did he choose to run away when everyone was trying their best to chase after him? Was it why he you to find to ss estim s's find s's s? He could just run away. Once he reached another continent, he wouldn't have the convenience of a landlord, and the golden person wouldn't be a threat to him. He took out the 5 treasures, the distant halberd, gale flag, earth-splitting jade bottle, and would kite one by one. He used the corresponding flying sword to encircle them before placing them in his sea of consciousness. This was the safest method. From this point of view, he didn't really believe in the bandits' methods. This was the caution that a cultivator should have. Even the snakeskin pouch, he found a flock of winged birds that were returning south and hid this item on one of them. The snakeskin pouch was a spatial artifact and couldn't be placed in a spatial storage ring. Carrying it on him was like carrying a bomb, and something would happen sooner or later. He actually had a better method to enter the rift, and that was to use the black iron plate's spatial rift expansion function to directly enter the rift. However, there was a problem here. The spatial rift he entered like this could only travel around the higher realm's man-made rift system, but he couldn't go to other continents because there was no beacon to guide him. He could only wander blindly in this part of the Golden Hall continent's spatial rift system, and he didn't dare to walk around recklessly for fear of getting lost. Moreover, there was a record of him coming to the Golden Hall continent. If there was no record of him leaving, it would make people suspicious. How did he leave? Why was he so sneaky? Especially under the background of being robbed during the treasure appraisal convention. Every single cultivator that didn't follow the rules would be noticed by the small vestibule. Even if it was something that would happen sooner or later, he still hoped that it would come a little slower. Half a month later, he arrived at the entrance of the rift, paid the fee, registered, and received the divine sense sweep by Yuanying, who was on duty. He was able to sense that Taoist master Yuanying's divine sense swept very carefully and wholeheartedly this time, and it was even to the extent that his 10 spatial storage rings slightly vibrated. Obviously, the robbery that occurred during the treasure appraisal convention had already spread here. Even if Taoist master Yuanying wasn't willing to interfere, he had to at least guard the checkpoint properly. Have you heard about the incident that occurred during the treasure appraisal convention? Taoist master Yuanying asked casually. Lu Xiaoyi answered honestly. In reply to Senior, I didn't hear about it, but experienced it myself. The Taoist master laughed. Then why did you flee in such a hurry like a stray dog? Can't you be a little more gentlemanly and do whatever you need to do in the Yellow Court continent? The innocent knows that they are innocent, and the muddy knows that they are muddy. Could it be that you don't believe in the justice of my Huangting Taoism? Lu Xiaoyi also laughed. I believe in the justice of a Yellow Court continent, but I'm afraid that it would loathe the process of pursuing justice. I don't know about other things, but in any case, if something like this were to happen in my carefree continent, then no one would be able to escape, and everyone would be thoroughly investigated. Disciple still has some secrets that I don't want others to know, so it's better for me to flee and save myself some trouble. The Taoist master said meaningfully, the Carefree Travel Society controls the entry and exit of cultivators who participate in the treasure appraisal convention. What makes you think that the Huangting Taoism wouldn't do the same? Lu Xiaoyi said solemnly, the Yellow Court continent wouldn't, because the pain of the mustard pond wouldn't affect the fundamental traditions of a great sect that has been passed down for generations. The Yellow Court continent is passed down because of the orthodox traditions of Taoism, and not because of a few so-called Jin Dan treasures. The Taoist master smiled. What a flattery! You flatter me so much. Where are you going? Lu Xiaoyi played it down. Disciple came out to travel the world. The Yellow Court continent has already been here, so the next stop is to go to the Yellow Court continent of supreme mystery to take a look, and then I'll go down in order. I'll probably stay outside for several decades. Taoist master Yellow Court nodded in agreement. To him, a few words of flattery from this little fellow wouldn't change his principles. However, there were too many ways for those bandits to leave the Yellow Court continent. If they directly went through the Sea of Clouds, there was simply no way to chase after them. So he didn't think that there would be any bandits who would be so daring as to use the spatial rift to teleport. Moreover, this person wasn't going back to the Carefree Travel Society, but to the Yellow Court continent of supreme mystery. This meant that he was selfless and just didn't want to stay here and cause more trouble for no reason. No cultivator liked this. If there was really a problem with going to the Yellow Court continent of supreme mystery, they could still follow. Chapter 746. When Lu Xiaoyi appeared at the exit of Taishuan's central Yellow Continent's crack, no one paid any attention to him. This was actually the bearing that a continent, an upper sect, should have. Even if there were 10,000 tiny Jin Dan, what could they do? This was the confidence that an upper sect should have. In the crack, he flew for close to a month. The time was already considered very short. If he directly crossed the Sea of Clouds, it would be no less than a year, and this was still considered smooth. The first feeling that Taishuan's central Yellow Continent gave him was that there were a lot of plants, lush and boundless. The entire continent was brimming with an extremely dense, wood-element spiritual vigor. No matter if it was the Carefree Continent or the Yellow Court Continent, the Qi activity was neutral, but it didn't have such a strong inclination towards the 5 elements. Here, he was a pure stranger, a passerby. Whether he could meet that fellow Qing Xian was purely dependent on luck. He wouldn't take the initiative to come into contact with the cultivators of Taishuan's central Yellow Continent, nor would he rashly inquire about it. Meeting was luck, missing was fate. The most important thing for him to come here was to find a place to refine those 4 spiritual weapons, then fuse them into his flying sword and complete the first shape of the 5 elements flying sword. In view of the dense wood element contained the breath of life here, he planned to simply finish the remaining 2 flying swords here. One was Luck Cutter, and the other was Big Dipper. It was time. Only at this moment, when his mind was completely relaxed and his thoughts were extremely active, did he suddenly realize the real reason why Yugu was unwilling to follow him. Yugu's last master, the great cultivator who had an extremely important influence on it, was also in Taishuan's central yellow continent. A bit careless, Lu Xiaoyi disappeared in the lush and luxuriant vegetation. A chase unfolded in the sea of clouds outside the yellow court. There weren't many Golden Hall cultivators who could follow. Basically, they were all cultivators of the small vestibule, because their strength was relatively higher and because the humiliation had to be washed away. At that time, when they chased in all directions from Guangqing Palace, there weren't many who could chase in the right direction. When someone discovered the traces of the bandit group, those who could still follow were all cultivators of the small vestibule, and a few people who lost their treasures. At that time, Xiao Bingji, Inya, and the other core members of the small vestibule did not choose the direction of pursuit easily because they knew that the possibility of pursuing the wrong target was much higher than pursuing the right one. Therefore, they simply rose above the Guangqing Palace and waited for the reply. Once the reply came, they would immediately fly at full speed. At this time, what was tested was not just the strength of the cultivator, but a series of comprehensive factors. In a long-distance pursuit, speed, cultivation, flying equipment, and so on were all very important. After the short-distance teleportation, the bandit group immediately took out their pre-buried flying boats and began to flee for their lives. This was their specialty. A cultivator who didn't know how to escape was not a good bandit. They were very experienced in this aspect. Bandit groups were very particular when it came to escaping. The glorious tradition that had been formed over tens of thousands of years made them pay attention to the details when escaping. In view of the fact that escaping in separate directions was easy to be defeated one by one, their biggest disadvantage was the number of people. Therefore, escaping in groups was the best choice. More than 10 flying boats flew forward, head to tail, like a giant centipede baring its fangs and brandishing its claws in the sky. The advantage of doing this was that not only could they rely on the strength of the whole group to increase their speed, but the last few people could also free up their hands to fight back against the pursuing enemies. A portion of the people flew with all their strength, while a portion of the people cast spells sluggishly. The division of labor was clear, and they worked together. For a time, the Golden Hall cultivators were like dogs biting a porcupine, and there was nowhere to bite. The direction was also very clear. They wanted to plunge into the sea of clouds surrounding the continent as soon as possible. As long as they entered the sea of clouds, with the sea of clouds' thickness and boundlessness, they could basically be considered to have escaped with their lives. The fight for the path of escape unfolded in the last tens of thousands of kilometers. Master Een displayed his strength at the level of the Golden Hall Grand Senior Brother. His wingtip shuttle was the only flying spirit tool that could chase after the Great U bandit group's flying centipede formation. Under his command, it continuously attacked the centipede formation, biting down on the last bandit one by one. Then, it was divided and eaten by the cultivators of the small vestibule that arrived later. Tens of thousands of kilometers of the 12 bandit groups, 7 were stopped. The remaining 5 plunged into the boundless sea of clouds. This time, even Master Een was powerless to do anything about it. The wildebeest bandit group was the loser, because not only did they not achieve their goal, they also lost 8 people. One of the bandit leaders who was injured in Guangqing Palace and searched for the snakeskin bag on the first floor to no avail decided to kill him. They could not lose their loot and leave someone alive. This was the rule of an ancient bandit group. He had no choice but to swallow this grievance. He had to bear it. Otherwise, others would say that the wildebeest bandit group had no strength and that they could not achieve their goal even after so many people died. They could only slowly investigate later and then find out who did this and then take revenge. To them, if the haunting Taoism was one step ahead, then they could only endure and not take revenge. If it was another treasure appraiser who did this, then they had to make up for it. This was also the ancient rule of the bandit group. The haunting Taoism was also a loser. They lost 5 Jin Dan great spirit tools and treasures. Although they chased and killed 7 bandits, they did not leave a single one alive. This was a huge failure. The bandit group was formed according to the ancient oath. On one hand, it was because they were fierce and stubborn, and on the other hand, it was because they were bound by the contract. If they left a single survivor, the entire bandit group would be destroyed. Therefore, it was not that the Golden Hall realm cultivators did not want to capture them alive, but that they could not. Sister Bing, let's enter the Sea of Clouds in a group and communicate with each other. I don't believe that we can't catch up to these bandits. Inu was still unwilling to give up, and this was actually what most of the cultivators in the small vestibule thought. Xia Bingji refused very firmly. No. How many of us have passed through the Sea of Clouds in our lives? 10 years? 10 years? Oh yeah, you only have a few times to play. How many years have they lived in the Sea of Clouds? To these bandits, they've spent half their lives here, and this is their home ground. How can we compare? Failure is failure. There is nothing to admit, but this isn't the end. We will always be able to find traces of them. Inya looked at her elder brother with a hopeful gaze. In this operation, there were 2 people in charge, and if elder brother supported them, eldest senior brother, Ian shook his head. Retreat. Return. Sister Bing is right. We have to admit defeat. All the corpses of the bandits and the things they left behind have to be thoroughly checked, and we can't let go of any suspicious points. Besides that, we have to retrace the entire process and deduce every single detail from the beginning. I suspect that they ought to have some companions that escaped, and they're amongst the crowd that was watching the show. Unfortunately, we are unable to gather all of them. Xia Bingji was calm like water. It's fine, they all have names and can't escape. Even if he is poor in the higher realm of Zhou Xian, I will surely capture him. Chapter 747. The cultivators in the small front courtyard returned to Guangqing Palace and started to sort out all the clues in their hands. They also reconstructed the actual scene of the robbery. Countless testimonies started to be gathered together. Other than those who left the Yellow Court continent or couldn't be found due to other reasons, there were about 700 testimonies that explained the situation from their own point of view. The most important ones were the 400-plus people on the 3rd floor of Guangqing Palace. When these things were gathered together, the truth also started to surface gradually. However, there were still many contradictions that caused them to be in a dilemma. Their method was a stupid method, but it was also helpless against cultivators of the Jindan realm. Only the elders among the true monarchs could reverse time, and they could only do the scene that the true monarch had seen and not any event at any location. That was something that even immortals couldn't do. There were many conclusions. After careful investigation, the specific scene at that time was perfectly reconstructed. They also discovered many contradictions that couldn't be justified until a piece of news from the Yellow Court Mountain came, which allowed them to completely clarify their direction. When the incident happened, the Yellow Court true monarch passed by that area. Even the Yuanying true monarch wouldn't interfere with a fight between the Jindan cultivators, let alone a true monarch. That true monarch only passed by and swept a glance. He didn't have the slightest intention of stopping the bandit group. This was a great opportunity for the disciples to train, and he wouldn't dampen their spirits. If they caught it, it meant that the disciples were capable. If they ran away, it would be a lesson. So what? It wouldn't damage the foundation of the Yellow Court sect at all. However, after the situation was settled, the Jindan cultivators returned in defeat. Their judgment of the entire incident had deviated, and even after several months of investigation, they couldn't come up with a definite conclusion. At this time, the true monarch didn't mind giving them a hint. The hint was very simple. The flying centipede formation of the bandit group didn't have the existence of the 5 elemental treasures. With just this one sentence, The direction of the investigation was decided. The snakeskin bag flew out and was intercepted. After a few twists and turns, the person who got hold of it, the person's subsequent movement trajectory, and the person who appeared at the first moment on this movement trajectory. The result was very clear. All the focus was on one person. One ear. I was so nice to him, but he actually did something behind my back and filled his own pockets. Inya's tone was very indignant, but there wasn't much anger on her face. Instead, it was a kind of surprise. She didn't harm a Golden Hall realm cultivator, nor did she take the initiative to rob him. Moreover, these 5 treasures were really not a loss that was extremely unacceptable to her. The crux of the matter was that her guess wasn't wrong. In the future, she would still be able to find this fellow to cause trouble for her, and it would allow her dreary life of cultivation to have a trace of color. Isn't this a bit too perfect? It was even more coincidental than a pie falling from the sky. It was as if he knew that there would definitely be pies in that place. They're not on the same side. This one ear should be working alone. The Zuchong incident should be his doing. He tricked people into letting out the treasures for appreciation, but he snatched them and ran away. I think he should be called a swindler instead of a thief. Xia Bingji judged. Inya laughed. She was heartless. I've never seen someone as foolish as Zhu Chong. He deserves to be cheated. Master Yin glared at her. You're not much stronger than Zhu Chong. Didn't your butterfly blue also get cheated into his hands? If it weren't for the fact that we were in the Guanqing Palace, and if it weren't for the fact that there were a large number of people lying in ambush in the palace, you would be the second Zhu Chong. Inya refused to accept this. Don't mention the environment, okay? Relying on the environment is also a kind of ability. Inya, have the ability to personally hand over the treasures to him, and he still has to obediently return them. He actually compared me to that idiot Zhu Chong. I'm so angry. Master Yin was disappointed and frustrated. There are 2 suspicious points. One is at that broken hole. No one would have thought that the thief would hide such an important item that they took so much effort to steal there. The other is that when the pirate group was flying, they would drop a snakeskin bag at a specific location, and it would be picked up by their helpers on the ground. They wouldn't have any stolen goods on them. This is also one of the rules of the ancient pirate group. As for the second point, we can't investigate it at all. No one knows which cultivators pass by there during that period of time. So we can only keep an eye on the first point, which is one ear who is very familiar with the 2 of you. I find it strange. How did the 2 of you do it? You were actually so close to the great thief, chatting and laughing, yet you didn't know? Not only were the treasures cheated, even the people were almost cheated. Don't come into contact with other cultivators. I've told the 2 of you many times, but you just won't listen. Xia Bingji raised her eyebrows. The people inside the imperial court are all good-for-nothings, and the cultivators outside have ulterior motives. The only person we should come into contact with is you. Is that what you mean? Master Yin, you have to understand what a cultivator is. Without freedom, you don't deserve to be a cultivator. This includes the right to choose your friends. This includes the right to do right or wrong. You have no right to ask for my life, and you have no right to ask for Ya's. We are people, not someone's accessory. Can you not think too highly of yourself? So what if we come into contact with him? This means that we have intuition about this. It's just that it's not very clear. I already told you to leave more people in Guanqing Palace, but you just had to place people outside. In the end, did you manage to stop them? If we had more people on the 3rd floor, no one would have been able to snatch that snakeskin bag. I seriously support Sister Bing. It's my right to get acquainted with whoever I want. Even the old ancestor can't stop me. Inya made her stand clear. At this time, she couldn't be soft. Her brother was too much. They were talking about official matters, but he actually brought private matters into it. She couldn't tolerate it. Master Yin fought 1 against 2 and lost. He was very depressed. It was really amazing for a thief to reach this realm. He even made the victim's family speak up for him. He was very clear that he couldn't provoke the 2 anymore. These 2 were famous for their stubbornness. If he didn't do well, he would lose his current position. He secretly made up his mind that he had to find this guy first and end everything once and for all. He had to cut the weeds and eliminate the roots. He also had friends in Tai Xian and Middle Yellow, and his connections were much wider than the two women's. It wasn't like he hadn't done this before. There were quite a few. Otherwise, why would there be so few pursuers of Xia Bingji, at least on the surface? It was just that he did it secretly, and his methods were ruthless. So even if outsiders had doubts, they didn't dare to make trouble. He was the eldest senior brother of the Yellow Court sect and also came from the Yin clan. Even if Xia Bingji had doubts, she wouldn't be able to get a handle on him. He had to occupy the moral high ground. This was very important to him. In this life, he had been pursuing perfection. Strength, reputation, Tao companion. He had achieved the first two. At least he had achieved it in the Yellow Court continent. But for the third, he had exhausted all his efforts but still couldn't get what he wanted. This was hundreds of years of hard work. He had worked hard since he built his foundation. He didn't know how long he could endure it. A proud person like him had been rejected for hundreds of years. Now, hundreds of years later, he had been moved at the beginning. But now it was just for a breath of air in his heart. The tenderness and sweetness of the past were long gone. It was more like an inner demon. If he didn't cross this hurdle, he wouldn't be able to become a nascent soul. This was the big trouble he had brought to himself in his pursuit of perfection. Chapter 748. Xia Bingji continued to talk about the bandit. She didn't want to excessively provoke this senior brother. She was deeply wary of this person. People who loved each other shouldn't be like this. In front of the senior brother, she wasn't as relaxed as in front of that bandit with one ear. This really was a strange feeling, even if that guy's mouth was full of vulgarities and strange words. My feeling is that although there were two groups of people, one ear must be familiar with this bandit group, or he must be familiar with one of them. Otherwise, there's no way to explain why he was able to stand at the periphery and not be affected by the spiritual explosion, calmly sending out his sword to stop them. But the bandits didn't react to this, which means that the bandits don't know him. Master Yin also returned to normal, but he must know the last person who took the snakeskin bag. Otherwise, why was he the only one left out? I heard from the junior brothers present that although one ear's flying sword isn't very powerful, his timing is very good. He can always ruin the bandits' plans at the most crucial moment. If it wasn't for him, the bandits would have already succeeded. Since he has this ability, why didn't he stop the last one? It must have been premeditated. The two of them colluded. He didn't stop them because he knew that the last bandit would leave the snakeskin bag to him. That must be it. Xia Bingji frowned. But there's another question. Why would the last bandit rather die to help him? What reason could make a Jin Dan disregard his own life to help others? In terms of control, the bandit group can be said to be extremely strict on their subordinates. The 7 people we stopped in the end would rather die than live because of this control. But one ear's control over this bandit is above the ancient rules? This doesn't make sense. Maybe it's because they appreciate each other? Heroes recognize heroes? Isn't that how it's always written in novels? For a friend, one would rather bear all the karma. Inya's imagination ran wild. Master Yin reprimanded her. Don't read those novels. They're all lies. Hundreds of years of cultivation. Just because of a promise, he was willing to give up his life. If it were you, would you be willing? Inya glared at him, her voice so weak that it was almost inaudible. As long as it's the right person, what's there to be unwilling about? Xia Bingji paid no further attention to the dispute between the two siblings. Since it has come to this, there's no point in speaking any further. This person has already left the Golden Court continent and headed towards the central yellow sky. How to deal with this matter will still have to wait for Martial Uncle and Martial Uncle's decision. However, as the initiator and host of this event, I am willing to bear all the responsibilities, including the compensation for the 5 senior brothers. Later, I will resign from my position in the small vestibule and reflect on my mistakes behind closed doors. Inya panicked. Sister Bing, it's not your fault. Why do you have to take responsibility for it? I don't have a position, so I don't really care if I resign or not. However, I can help you with those 5 treasures. I'm much richer than you. Mr. Een was speechless. In a world of cultivation, if there was success, there must be failure. If people were so impulsive after failure, who would work hard in the future? So the 5 treasure holders were not responsible for this? His treasure was taken away by the space, and he didn't react at all. He really deserved it. However, although he thought so in his heart, he couldn't say it out loud. Let's bear it together. After all, there are 2 people in charge. Xia Yubing turned and left. She said indifferently, "That's your problem. It has nothing to do with me." Looking at the backs of the 2 women leaving, a trace of malevolence flashed past Master Yin's face. He gave them face, but they didn't want it. Did they really think they had him in the bag? He needed to thoroughly think about his future. He was about to reach the nascent soul realm. Some things had to be settled. He couldn't let it drag on like this. 2 months later, Xia Bingji left the small vestibule and pondered over her immortal's cave alone. After another month, she disappeared. According to her master, she went out to relax because she was annoyed. Soon after, a figure sneaked down from the yellow court mountain. Enya disguised herself and successfully deceived the cultivators of her family. She stepped on the path of a heroine that she yearned for even in her dreams. Where did Sister Bing go? Although she didn't say it as a good sister, how could she not guess? Why could Sister Bing go, but she couldn't? She heard that Yellow Court in Taixin was a very beautiful place. It was a paradise of flowers and birds. She had been yearning for it for a long time. This time, she was to admire the flowers and grass, and also to catch the thief one ear. It was truly killing 2 birds with 1 stone. It couldn't be more suitable. One ear, where do you think you're going? Watch me, Heroine Een, get rid of evil for the people. Master Een was the last to leave. His excuse was that he was seeking a breakthrough in his state of mind for reaching the nascent soul realm. With his status, no one would restrict him. He could come and go freely. Moreover, it wasn't his first time going to Yellow Court in Taixin. As the eldest martial brother of one of the 9 great sects, Jin Dan, interacting with the other sects was one of his responsibilities. From there, he made countless friends, including the eldest martial brothers of Taixin. He was very clear about where the 2 women went. He purposely waited for them to leave before he made his move. To him, this was a crucial step to solve his own problem. Actually, he didn't care whether he could get back those 5 treasures or not. Why? He should chase after his own treasures. He wasn't the father of those 5 people, so he couldn't care so much. In the depths of the Een family's main residence, a beautiful woman stood in front of a cottage. She had already waited for a long time. Just as she was about to lose her patience, an old voice came from inside. Children and grandchildren have their own fortune. Let her be. This child, if she continues to be raised in a golden cage, Jin Dan will be her limit. Is this what you want? She has to go out and experience it. No matter if it's good or bad, it will be beneficial for her cultivation. Don't interfere recklessly. Otherwise, you will ruin her opportunity. She has to walk her own path. Just now, I occasionally divined, but it was just a scare. That's all. Only then did the beautiful woman heave a sigh of relief. She thanked the ancestor and slowly left. The old man inside laughed bitterly. He didn't know how to do divination, but with his thousands of years of life, he knew very well that this child had reached the point where she had to go out. As for the future, how could he, a monarch, decide it? The cultivation family had been around for thousands of years. In fact, they were very clear about this. They were quite liberal with a Yuz education, but this wasn't enough. It seemed like they had provided her with a lot of independent space. For example, the Treasure Appraisal Convention, this time, was actually under layers of protection. Different people had different requirements and pressures. For example, a Yuz path from Foundation Establishment to Jin Dan had been smooth sailing. The pressure of breaking through to Yuanying was very great. This was a kind of balance. The smoothness of the past and the favor of the heavens had to be repaid with an equivalent price. If I didn't encounter a great disaster, she wouldn't be able to pass this hurdle. Therefore, even though he knew that this child would most likely encounter the harshest blow of her life when she went to the outer land, he still wouldn't stop her. A blow was a disaster, but it was also an opportunity. To a cultivator, it was the same thing. Chapter 749. Mount E. Wunguang Peak in the chaotic Thunder Palace. The palace master, Taoist Master Yu, looked at the little foundation establishment cultivator in front of him with a pleasant expression. He tried his best to keep his tone calm and even hid his aura, afraid that he would frighten the little girl in front of him. Sigue, there's already a reply to the matter you asked me to investigate for you. At the dome of the fifth ring, the soul lamp of the outer swordsman's cigarette, but is healthy and undamaged, without any abnormalities. In fact, it's even stronger than before. Therefore, although we still don't know where he is now, the fact that the light hasn't extinguished for more than 20 years means that he's still very safe for now. He's in a relatively stable environment, so you don't have to worry. I'm talking about you. The floating raft from the fifth ring will take off in 2 hours. Are you really not going to consider going with the raft to the fifth ring? It's not that the sect is forcing you. In the end, only you can make the decision. However, I want to say that whether it's the environment, resources, teachers, opportunities, more senior brothers and sisters, the atmosphere competition, and so on, they're all more suitable for the growth of an inner swordsman. Cultivators shouldn't take personal feelings as their likes and dislikes. This is the foundation, otherwise they won't be able to go far. Besides, no one can be sure if the cigarette will appear at Mount E or the dome of the fifth ring when it returns. If you insist on staying here, it's meaningless for you to meet him. Why not let nature take its course and let fate take its course? Perhaps you can even follow the trend of the heavens and cross paths? On Mount E, the most awkward wasn't the outer sword lineage, but the inner sword lineage. Because the outer sword lineage didn't have a threshold to enter, they had the advantage of numbers. Even if all the elites were chosen to go to the fifth ring, there would still be an absolute number of outer swords left. Among the remaining outer swords, there would always be some who were chosen wrongly. Later on, those who were enlightened suddenly had a change of heart. However, the inner swords were different. The inner swords didn't have a choice. All the inner swords who captured the sword pill were qualified to go to the fifth ring. Therefore, there were only a few left. They were all cultivators who had a deep attachment to the blue sky. Even if they had to give up a better future, they were cultivators who wanted to stay in their hometown. There were very few of them, less than 10 of them. This Si Gue, whose original name was Huang Xiaoya, came from the land of exile. After he entered the Foundation establishment realm, he caught the eye of Lu Xiaoyi, the external sword supervisor who was cultivating in the land of exile at that time. He used his personal authority to send him back to Mount Shao. However, he didn't expect that after testing his sword pill, he would be able to easily kill him and add another talent to the internal sword lineage. But this was also the problem. Because this Lu Xiaoyi could be considered Huang Xiaoya's benefactor, without his recommendation, it was impossible for her to come to Mount E, so she was determined to stay here alone. Even if she became a rare swordsman, she was still unwilling to leave Mount E. There was no need to ask. She was waiting for her benefactor to return. The problem was that the external sword Lu Xiaoyi had accidentally fallen into a space crack in the land of exile. Since then, no one knew where he had gone. Even though there were several immortals on Mount E, they could not determine where he had drifted to. This was an unsolvable problem in the cultivation world. In the end, he was living a good life in the outside world. It was a pity that the good seedling of his inner sword was waiting for him. No matter how he tried to persuade her, she wouldn't listen. In the past 20 years, the fifth ring's floating raft had traveled back and forth many times. Every time, the old Taoist would ask her if she had changed her mind, but every time, he would be disappointed. This time, he had especially emphasized the problem of Lu Xiaoyi's soul lamp. But in the end, this little girl was completely unmoved. She was like a stone in a latrine, smelly and hard, making people feel helpless. Many thanks to Taoist Yu for granting my wish. But Xiaoyi was born here and grew up here. So she has the responsibility to protect everything here. Many of my talented senior and junior brothers and sisters have already gone to the fifth ring, so Xiaoyu alone won't make a difference. Let me stay here to protect Mount E, to protect the land of exile. Moreover, Xiaoyu doesn't think that practicing the sword in the blue sky will make a difference in the fifth ring. I will use my strength to prove it to you. Daoist was speechless. A very good disciple, what a pity. Not necessarily. Huang Xiaoyao left the Thunder Palace, not at all regretting her choice. Once she had made up her mind, she would carry it out relentlessly. No one could persuade her otherwise. That guy had been sucked into the spatial crack in the land of exile. She had never thought that he would leave in such a way. No one knew what kind of place the spatial crack was better than them, the natives of the land of exile. It was a place that every cultivator had been taught to avoid at all costs. Once one fell into it, it was very likely that it would be there for the rest of one's life. That guy clearly knew it was dangerous, but he still fell into it without hesitation. He must have his own reasons, must have discovered something. She was also from Xianyuan, so she had the responsibility to carry her own burden for Xianyuan. This Xuanyuan's heart, not in the level of cultivation, but in the depths of her consciousness, had never wavered. The guy had left her his last words. Oh no, the jade slip he had left behind. She had already read it countless times. With the increase in her knowledge and experience, she could understand more about the dangers and unpredictability involved. She could also understand more why that guy didn't inform the sect of these things right now. Without any evidence, if they were to speak of it now, it would only cause chaos in the army's morale, and it would be groundless fears. Except for being scolded by the elders, there would be no result. She believed in that guy's judgment, and also believed in her own judgment. What she needed to do now was to work hard to improve herself and wait for that guy to come back. She hoped that when the curtain was lifted, she would have the qualifications to participate in it, and not just be a spectator. In the jade slip that guy left behind, the name of the elder was only mentioned a few times, and it was Nanjinren who was in charge of the sword Qi rushing Heaven Pavilion. She also knew that this was the closest and most trusted elder of that guy in Mount Shao, but she still wouldn't say anything, because doing so would put Nanjinren in a dilemma. There would definitely be a suitable opportunity, she firmly believed. After leaving the Thunder Hall, Huang Xiaoya directly flew to the rushing Heaven Pavilion. Her identity was a little special. Not only was she a rare inner swordsman, but she was also brought here by Lu Xiaoyi. She could be considered to have an indissoluble fate with the external sword sect. She was also beautiful, so she was very popular in both the inner and outer branches of Mount Shao. All the way to the rushing Heaven Pavilion, there was no obstruction. The cultivators all knew that the little girl came to talk to Nanjinren, so no one stopped her. It wasn't until she saw that he AI's figure buried in the pile of jade slips that she jumped over. Grandpa Nan, let me tell you a piece of good news. Lu Xiaoyi's soul lamp is still burning well. I heard that the lamp flame is still growing. This is a good life. I guess he ran to the widow country. Otherwise, he wouldn't be so happy. Nanjinren wasn't surprised at all. Every time someone from the fifth ring came, he would be the first to know. Girl, you refused Yuzhiren again? It's not good for you to be like this. In terms of cultivation, the current Mount Shao is indeed inferior to the dome. I don't know who you learned this stubborn temper from. Huang Xiaoya laughed. Grandpa Nan, you're not surprised at all. You already knew about that guy's situation. Aren't you worried? Nanjinren sighed and looked into the distance. What's there to worry about? He just went to the stage he should go to, and now he's a hoodlum. Chapter 750. You really don't want to go to the fifth ring road. Just a moment ago, Nanjinren just sent away a guest. Bingke was very determined. No, I'm a man of Mount Shao and a ghost of Mount Shao when I die. My heart is clear and can reflect the sun and the moon. Nanjinren waved his hand to stop him. Speak human language. Don't learn from some people's flowery words. I want to know the real reason. Bingke succeeded in forming essence in Yunding before the year, and then returned to Mount Shao to consolidate. Then he went back and forth on the floating raft. According to the rules of Mount Shao, inner sword disciples were given the dome unconditionally. Outer sword disciples needed to be selected. Outer sword Jindan was also given the 5th ring unconditionally, as long as you were willing. Bing Ke laughed awkwardly. Before Master Lu left, he told me that he was in charge of Mount Zhao's education for 100 years. He needed a benchmark, an example, a model. If I go to the 5th ring road, I can only be a negative example. There is no need to talk about education. I can only be an example in Mount Shao, so I can't go. Nanjinren said earnestly, "You see, Lu Xiaoyi is missing, and we don't know whether he is alive or dead. His education plan can only be abandoned. And I was the one who gave him the task at that time. Now, my suggestion is that you can actually escape from the constraints of this task." Bing Ke shook his head like a rattle drum. No, Master Lu is just missing, not dead. I haven't worshipped him as my teacher. How can he be dead? Loyalty is the foundation of a cultivator. Especially for me, a swordsman, a promise is worth 1,000 gold. If the task changes, Master Lu should give me the order personally. Of course, if you force me. Nanjinren was helpless. Why should I force you? I just hope you don't use this as a reason to stay in Mount Shao. Your situation is just getting better. It will be a pity if you don't put you in a prosperous environment. Bing Ke laughed. If I stay in Mount Shao, many people will be prosperous. In Mount Shao, and also in Yunding, I have a lot of tasks. As for the environment, you don't have to worry. Master Lu said that there is Tao everywhere, and there is a road to the upper realm. Not only the 5th ring road. Since I could walk out in the past, I will walk out in the future. Nanjinren pressed his forehead and had a headache. Yunding, don't go too far. Bing Ke smiles mysteriously. Don't worry. Sooner or later, the cloud top will become the side palace of Shao Mountain. As long as you give me time, I won't go overboard. I have a master in the Cloud Lake Archipelago. He'll protect me. Spiritual master, Nan was completely speechless. Did he have another master? My child has grown up and is no longer under my command. It was also quite good. It was full of variables and also full of hope. He knew that people like Huang Xiaoya and Bing Ke were not telling the truth. They did not tell the real reason why they stayed in Shao Mountain. They were just waiting for someone. Little Eagle was starting to have followers. Huang Xiaoya said a few words and ran off on her own. The old Taoist master carefully counted the people of Mount E to see if he had missed any. This was his responsibility. He did not want to delay the chances of every swordsman with potential. Suddenly, he thought of someone. His figure flashed, and he appeared within a grotto mansion beneath Thousand Grace Peak. Inside the grotto mansion, a cultivator was seated cross-legged, recuperating from his injuries. Reverend Nan frowned. Why are you so heavily injured this time? Do you need the sect to help you? Li Peinan shook his head, a ruthless look in his eyes. No need. Get up from where you fell. Last time, Bing Ke and I were a little careless. Now that he has also reached the bearing essence stage, it must be different. Reverend Nin suddenly realized that he was not very clear about the process of some daily activities. But since this guy was on a mission with Bing Ke, it seemed normal for him to be injured like this. It was a miracle that he could survive and come back. There is a floating raft to the 5th ring road. You have been in Shao Mountain for more than 10 years, right? You have been cautious and conscientious. You have been fighting everywhere. Your contributions are not small. Do you want to change your cultivation environment or change to a bigger stage? Li Peinan shook his head and refused. I still have a lot of things to do here. There are too many things to prove. Don't bully. Where is not cultivation? I will stay in Qingkong. Reverend Nin did not persuade him anymore. He sighed and turned to leave. Before he went out, he could not help but say something. Well, get up from where you fell. The principle is not bad, but sometimes you can actually change your way. For example, change your partner or something. Reverend Nan left. Li Peinan felt very strange. Change partners? Why should he change? Bing Ke just reached the bearing essence stage. It was the right time to use him, and he was also very familiar with the cloud top. How could other people have this condition? There was nothing to be afraid of. Li Peinan was famous for being hard to kill. He would make up for it sooner or later. Taishan Zhonghuang. Today, a guest came to the Zhonghuang mountain gate with a Huangting Taoist talisman. He wanted to see the current generation of Jindan in Taishan Zhonghuang. The term eldest brother was very popular in today's world of cultivation. He could help the sect to do vertical management of the cultivators at this level. He could better understand the demands, confusion, and internal disputes of the cultivators at this level. Foundation establishment had their eldest brother. Jindan had their eldest brother. Of course, when it came to Yuanying and above, there was no such position because the universe was so vast that one person could not take care of everything. Eldest senior brother needed to be outstanding in various aspects such as strength, cultivation, reputation, status, resources, connections, and so on before he could take on the role. It was not something that could be taken on just by being outstanding in one aspect. In the sword range, sword cultivators depended on who was better at fighting. However, in the Dharma range, Dharma cultivators had to consider more things and take into account all aspects. The current eldest brother in Taishan Zhonghuang was called Gu Yuan. He was a very outstanding cultivator at the peak of Jindan. He was also very famous in the upper world of Zhou Xian. The two of them met at Tage and talked about their parting. They were both eldest brothers of the 9 upper sects and had met several times. This was a necessary connection. If the junior brothers and sisters below them had conflicts with each other, at their level, it was just a greeting and a few words. It would not escalate to the higher levels. It was a very important link to maintain the balance of the cultivation world. Gu Yuan smiled and said, "What brings you here, Brother Yin? The last time we met was 50 years ago. Time is like smoke. In another 50 years, the ones who can sit down and talk may not be you and me." Master Yin was also very emotional. "Senior Brother Gu, judging from your aura, I'm afraid you've already started preparing, but I'm half a step behind and still running between continents." Gu Yuan waved his hand. "What's the difference? Starting early doesn't mean ending early. What brings you here, Brother Yin? If you came half a month later, I'm afraid you wouldn't have seen me. Our sects have always been on good terms. If you have something to say, just say it so that I can arrange it properly." Master Yin did not hold back. He knew very well that Gu Yuan was preparing to go into seclusion to break through in half a month. If that was the case, it was not that he couldn't find other eldest brothers of Taishan Zhonghuang, but it would not be as convenient as finding someone as famous as Gu Yuan. Moreover, other people would be more attentive to the task that he gave them. Chapter 751. So he said directly, "I came to your place to find a person, single ear from the Xiaoyao tour. This person came from an unorthodox sect in Little Lu and joined the Xiaoyao tour 10 years ago. He is a marginal disciple. A few days ago, he committed a big crime in the Yellow Court and needs to be arrested. According to the records of the space crack, this person came to Taishan a year ago. This is certain. What I want to ask is, first, whether this person has left Taishan. If not, I want to use your sect to help to find this person's information. As for how to do it, I will do it personally and won't trouble your sect. Brother Gu, do you have any difficulties?" Gu Yuan was a little hesitant. To be honest, in terms of relationships, Taishan, Huangzhong, Huangting sect, and Carefree Travel were all Orthodox Taoists. Their relationships were more or less the same, and it was hard to say who was better. The cultivation world did not talk about relationships like this, but about benefits. Offending the Xiaoyao tour for the sake of Huangting Taoism was meaningless. But if it only stopped at the level of Jindan, it was self-evident who was more important, a senior brother or a marginal disciple. The key was the truth of the matter. "Brother Yin, it is your first time here. Please rest for a few days. I will send someone to check the records of the space crack, and then make a decision." Master Yin wasn't angry. He was very clear about the principles of each sect. It was the same for him to receive him. He just had to wait. 5 days later, Gu Yuan hosted a banquet for him. During the banquet, he said, "According to the records of the space crack, there is a record of this person entering, but there is no record of him leaving. If he didn't go through the sea of clouds, he would still be in Taishan continent. But the continent is too big, and there's a sea of people. It is not easy to find a person, especially under the premise that this person keeps a low profile. It will take time, a lot of time. How about this? I will send a junior brother in charge of coordination. Once there is news, we will set off immediately. What do you think? Thank you for your help, senior brother. It is not a big deal, but because it involves some personal matters, I came here personally. Senior brother is so righteous. If you miss this opportunity, you will be rewarded. If he could find this person, he would personally be willing to owe him a favor. This kind of declaration was more practical than purely business dealings. Cultivators rarely went back on their word. Not long after, a sanctimonious Taoist walked in. Looking at his face, one could tell that he was a potential cultivator. He was full of energy, relaxed, and calm. His eyes were full of spirit. Master Yin praised, Tai Xian is full of talents. What a prosperous scene. He was very satisfied. With one look at this person, he knew that Gu Yuan was not being perfunctory. Jin Dan's cultivation was close to the peak of the late stage. No matter which sect he was placed in, he would still be an important figure. Since Brother Yin has come personally, I should have taken care of it myself. However, we can't afford to make any mistakes in the upper realm. Cultivators like you and I both understand the true meaning of this. This is Junior Brother Quan Su. His martial arts are exceptional. In terms of strength, I don't think I'm his match. If he cooperates with you, no matter what happens, you will be confident. Master Yin stood up to express his thanks. Quan Su was very polite and did not say much. After receiving the task, she went to make the arrangements. This was not something that could be done immediately. In the sea of people, it was difficult to find a hidden person. Even if it was the landlord, Tai Xian, Zhong Huang, it would be difficult. The two of them continued to drink. However, they did not expect that when Taoist Quan Su came out of Tage, there was a fierce look in his eyes. This scumbag Lu Xiaoyi, of all places, why did he have to come at Tai Xian and Zhong Huang? Wasn't he looking for trouble? You stole someone else's treasure and came here to let him wipe your ass. You are really not a human being. He was also a decisive person. Looking for trouble for Qing Xian? He must put this pot of sh*t back. When he found this grandson, he would find a chance to kill this *t senior brother Yin and then put the blame on him. No one would be able to live in peace. He needed to plan well. He needed to find some trouble for this guy so that he would stop in the future. Even if he wanted to cause trouble, he could just go to other continents. In a beautiful mountain range surrounded by endless forests, there was a small lake. Next to the small lake was a straw hut. A naked man floated out of the lake, holding a big fat fish in his hand. Roast fish for dinner. Lu Xiaoyi had been in Taishan continent for 5 years. He plunged into the forests and mountains and completed his swordsmanship system in this isolated place. He had no contact with anyone, so of course, he did not know that there were countless people looking for him. When a cultivator was in this state of seclusion, it was almost impossible to find someone in the vastness of the continent. After 5 years, he successfully completed the initial shape of his swordsmanship system. All 5 of the 5 elements flying swords were successfully integrated. The luck cutter and the Big Dipper were also smoothly integrated into his brain. At this point, the foundation was set, and the overall situation was beginning to take shape. There were also surprising changes. After the luck cutter flew into his brain, it did not gather with the other flying swords. Instead, it drilled into the intercepted luck as if this was its territory. It slowly became inseparable from the intercepted luck. The result was that Lu Xiaoyi could influence the intercepted luck to a certain extent through the luck cutter flying sword. As time passed, this influence was slowly deepening. There were 2 direct consequences. The intercepted luck no longer had to worry about being discovered by others. If the current Qing Xian used his yin-yang eye, they would not be able to discover his secret. This was because the intercepted luck had begun to transform into a sword spirit. Furthermore, his current luck severing was the true luck severing. It was not like the previous luck severing that appeared to be right, but was actually wrong. sometimes effective, but sometimes not. The Big Dipper flying sword seemed to be unable to stay in the Niwen Palace. It was very restless. Lu Xiaoyi was moved. He simply moved it into the sea of Qi Dantian, the 7 stars colorless elixir. This proved to be a wise decision. Not only did its power increase greatly, the sword spirit was like a fish in water. More importantly, he began to understand the true meaning of the sword aura division. In his original plan, the sword aura division was still a long way away. It required a lot of preparation and experimentation, including the internal sword scraping method, the external sword illusionary method, the sword disc ejecting method. But now he suddenly realized that at least for the Big Dipper flying sword, he actually only had one method, the stars method. In theory, when his star elixir and the Big Dipper sword spirit were combined, the number of stars that he could perceive would be the number of sword aura division. He did not have to consider the sword decay and the influence of the sword layer on the sword aura division. This was because this was a brand new, special method that only belonged to the Big Dipper sword spirit. The other sword discs were useless because they were not the star sword spirits. Now, he had already perceived more than 3,000 stars. In other words, he could now use the Big Dipper flying sword to release 3,000 sword auras at the same time. If he could perceive more than 10,000 stars, the sword auras would be more than 10,000. When he reached the level of Yuanying, perfected lord, and perceived more than 100,000 stars, the moment he used the Big Dipper, there would be 100,000 sword auras. It was really scary. After circling around and spending a lot of effort to move the sword disc into the sea of consciousness, he realized that the treasure was in the most ordinary Dantian. Cultivation is just so magical. It always surpasses your imagination. Chapter 752. Sword Ray Division was the crown of the swordsman's skill tree. It was difficult to calculate how much sword ray division would increase the strength of a swordsman. Under normal circumstances, if 2 swordsmen's strength were on par with each other, one could not sword ray division while the other could. What would happen if both of them attacked at the same time? For the swordsman who could not sword ray division, his sword strength was set at 100%. However, for the swordsman who could sword ray division, after going through sword decay and sword layer, the strength of each sword ray division would be around 60% to 70%. The strongest sword ray division would be around 80%, and below 50% to 60%, it meant that the swordsman had not mastered sword ray division. Then, based on pure strength, did that mean that the swordsman who could sword ray division would be 600 to 700 times stronger than the other swordsman? Obviously, that was not the case. If all of this was true, wouldn't it mean that the swordsman could easily surpass realms to defeat enemies? The simple logic was that if a single needle could not pierce through a layer of cowhide, then 1,000 needles that were weaker than the cowhide would not be able to pierce through it. Furthermore, as one's realms increased, one would be able to reach the Tao realm, the spirit realm, and other mysterious realms. These higher realms were not afraid of quantity and could even be completely ignored. Therefore, it was wrong to use a simple multiplier to measure it. For example, even if a spellcaster could release 10,000 water arrows at the same time, they would still be water arrows. They would not be able to transform into water dragons. However, sword ray division was still a decisive factor in increasing the strength of a swordsman. It could be seen in other aspects. For example, through large-scale, indiscriminate, and impenetrable attacks, one could quickly find a loophole in the opponent's defense. This was something that a single sword could not achieve in a short period of time. For example, because of the existence of thousands of sword rays, a single sword formation could easily block the large-scale attacks of a spellcaster and would not have to face the awkwardness of a single sword ray division blocking a forbidden spell. For example, sword ray fusion. When thousands of sword rays suddenly converged in the air and fused into a single sword, the fusion power produced would be much stronger than a single sword strike. As long as a swordsman practiced more, he would be able to completely master this technique. It was very suitable for breaking through the defense. There were many more changes like this, and they greatly enriched the swordsman's attacking methods. Finally, it allowed the swordsman to have the ability to decide the fate of the universe with a single slash. That was why Smoky Ash said that his sword spirit would slowly disappear after he became a Jean Dan. What she meant was that true swordsman experts didn't compete on who had more sword spirits, but on the ultimate use of a flying sword with a sword spirit. When a flying sword could split into hundreds of thousands or millions of sword beams, what was the use of having more sword spirits? Troubles came suddenly. This was cultivation. When you climbed to the top of a mountain, you would immediately discover that there were even higher and more dangerous peaks behind. He had yet to master this sword-light division, but he was already considering whether he should merge the sword spirits. That was a joke. To him, having more sword spirits meant having more combat power. He would think of a solution when 7 sword spirits became a burden to him. To the current Lu Xiaoyi, mastering the sword-light division with his Jean Dan intermediate stage cultivation was a miracle, but it was also a burden. This was because the sword-light division had an extremely high requirement on the cultivator's magic power and soul. He had to ensure that every sword beam would be full of energy and not weak like a sickly person. There was no problem with his mental strength. This was where he far surpassed other cultivators of the same level. His problem was his cultivation. Under normal circumstances, Lu Xiaoyi's magic power would be depleted by about 1% of his total magic power. However, when he circulated his technique, his magic power would be replenished by more than 1%. In other words, if he stood here and continuously unleashed his sword, he would be able to unleash it until he died. However, if in battle, there was the consumption of his escape technique, the maintenance of his defensive techniques, the high frequency of unleashing his sword, and the high intensity of his sword formation. Under such consumption, he would not be able to replenish his magic power. He would slowly wither in battle. The sword-light division was something that consumed a large amount of his magic power in an instant. In theory, he could unleash more than 1,000 sword beams at the same time, because he had comprehended more than 1,000 stars. However, if he really did that, his magic power would be depleted in an instant, and he would become a dried corpse. The current him could only sustain less than 10 sword beams. This was based on the situation of a normal battle. If he wanted to unleash his power in an instant, he could unleash 100 sword beams. However, the consequence was that if he could not take down his opponent after unleashing his power, he would have to consider the problem of escaping. If he hesitated, even his escape technique would be difficult. After all, the restrictions of the heavenly Tao could not provide such a method to allow a cultivator of a lower realm to achieve the same level as a cultivator of a higher realm. Lu Xiaoyi had relied on his own efforts to achieve this in a short period of time, which was already a very abnormal existence. The study of the Big Dipper flying sword was still in the process of slowly accumulating experience. He could not be impatient. However, this did not mean that he would give up on the sword-light division of the other flying swords. He would slowly start to experiment with the basics. However, he was more relaxed now. Compared to 5 years ago, his swordsmanship had a qualitative improvement. The 7 sword plates and the sword-light division of the Big Dipper flying sword were now restricting him back to his magic power cultivation. Cultivation was a cycle. It was an endless cycle between techniques and techniques. There was no time for perfection. However, he could not continue to improve like this. There was no end to something like this. When would there be an end? The path of cultivation was to take it one step at a time. Although this place was very beautiful and the scenery was picturesque, this was the beauty of nature. After experiencing more, one should change a method and try out the beauty of humans. He flew out of the mountain forest with a carefree mood. However, he knew very well that the incident that occurred in the Yellow Court continent would not end like this. There would surely be people who would come to settle the score. The only difference was what level of cultivation would they be at? Was it a personal action? Or was it the action of a power? These were only incidental matters. He could be considered to have a rough understanding of the laws of the cultivation world in Zhou. Even if the robbery incident occurred in the Treasure Appraisal Convention in the Yellow Court continent, the Yellow Court Yuanying Taoist master did not appear. This already indicated something. Since there were no Golden Hall cultivators that died in the robbery incident, he could practically confirm that even if someone chased to the Yellow Court of Supreme Mystery, it would only be a training for Jin Dan. As he traveled, he pondered about how to get in touch with that fellow Qing Xian. He couldn't be too deliberate, couldn't make a big fuss, and couldn't expose his tracks. If he only relied on luck, this was practically an impossible task. He needed to make inquiries. The problem was, should he approach a certain supreme mystery cultivator, or through the merchant association system that was everywhere? Chapter 753. Lu Xiaoyi wanted to find Qing Xian, but he wasn't in a hurry. He just wanted to establish a stable line of communication through Yuhu. If these three hairy people were to do their own things, the efficiency would be too low. There was one thing that he really wanted to get evidence from Qing Xian, and that was the problem of Zhou Xian's fate overflowing in the upper realm. This was also the main reason why they came to the upper realm of Zhou Xian. Lu Xiaoyi stayed in Shaoyao Mountain for a few years. He also deliberately looked for similar things in the Ancient Records building, but he didn't find anything. He also deliberately observed the state of the sea of consciousness of the ordinary Foundation establishment cultivators in the Shaoyao continent. Almost all of them had fate, and it was an active fate. It seemed that the cultivators in the upper realm of Zhou Xian having fate was a natural thing. There was nothing strange about it. Everyone had it. It was difficult to understand it further. You couldn't ask people, hey, what's the origin of this thing in our heads? What time is it? What method did it use to get into our minds? They were already a few hundred years old, and only now did they remember the strangeness of this thing. There didn't seem to be any skills on how to use this thing, except for one point. In the Space Crack channel, fate was the only guide. The cultivators were very used to it, as if it was a kind of instinct. Was so strange about instinct to them. Didn't everyone have it? Unless you weren't from the upper realm of Zhou Xian. He really wanted to know Qing Xian's opinion on this. And he really wanted to know if the Shaoyao continent was the same as the Taishan continent. Or was the whole upper realm of Zhou Xian like this? The Taoists of the three pure ones were very good at integrating into new sects because their orthodoxies were very similar to each other. Unlike Lu Xiaoyi, who was born in the sword range and had yet to find a way to make a name for himself in the free and unfettered travel, he had yet to perfectly integrate into the system of the free and unfettered travel. This was the huge difference in integration between the mainstream and the branch. Only after the two of them had a deep exchange of views could they determine a direction and dig deeper to achieve a breakthrough. Lu Xiaoyi suspected that it was during the Taoist boy's qi, but he didn't have any concrete proof. Because he was from the outer land, the free and unfettered wander wouldn't allow him to preside over a region for the time being. Therefore, he didn't observe closely before and after the Taoist boy's qi to see if he really had some kind of luck. Hopefully, Qing Xian would gain something. In the end, he still chose the Chamber of Commerce. As far as he was concerned, the characteristic of the Merchant Association's Eye of Spirit Stones was able to guarantee their reputation to the greatest extent. Thus, he felt that his actions in the Golden Hall continent weren't a big deal, and it was impossible for the Huangting Taoism to spare no effort to capture him. It was impossible for the Huangting Taoism to reach the level of a sex search. At most, the Huangting Taoism would ask a friend they were familiar with and utilize some personal strength. Under such circumstances, as long as the Huangting Taoism didn't come out in the form of a sect, the Chamber of Commerce would rarely betray their own customers. Because he was looking for someone from the Huangting Taoism, he could only beat around the bush and couldn't ask openly. This was a taboo. Although the Chamber of Commerce loved spirit stones, they would also care about the feelings of the owner of this continent. If they were looking for someone from the outer land, they could dafa. Therefore, they could only chat after they got familiar with each other. This required him to have a suitable identity. If you were a prodigal who wasn't around today and whose whereabouts were uncertain, how could you make friends with people if you weren't a stable customer of the Chamber of Commerce? Only by finding a place to settle down, and then settling down in a big shop with power and influence, could they form mutual trust. He needed to find a big shop in a big city to have a certain understanding of the situation. Hopefully, the guy from Qingxian had been released to preside over a region. Judging from the time he entered the sect, this was possible. The city of Evernight was the city he was looking for. From the name, one could tell what industry was the most developed in this city. With Lu Xiaoyi's temperament, since he was going to live here for a while, of course, he would let himself live a comfortable life. There was no reason for him to suffer. The city of Evernight was one of the top 10 big cities in the Taishan continent. It was a place where good and bad people mixed together. It was also a place where one could fish in troubled waters. He lowered his state to Zhuji. Now he was more and more proficient in the use of the silence of stars. He dispersed his qi into the 3,000 stars that he had perceived and did a good job of restraining his qi. He opened a restaurant for training Taoist children. It was not only for the sake of staying here, but also for the sake of observing the process of the Taoist children's qi and spirit sense. He wanted to see if it was really a process of fate, as he thought. Renting a house, decorating, hanging a sign, and filing a record with the local government. As a Zhuji cultivator, opening a restaurant to train new disciples was a contribution to the cultivation education. It was a good thing, so there were not many obstacles. As for whether you could make a name for yourself, break even, and earn resources for your own cultivation while teaching disciples, it depended on your own ability. No one would help you. As for the name, it was just a small qi training restaurant. He did not expect many people to send their children here. For him, as long as there was one, it would be enough to satisfy his observation of the process of the Taoist children's qi in the upper realm in Zhouxian. Could not sense it. It did not matter. Even if he had to buy elixirs, he would still take the child. He was not in a hurry. This kind of thing was not something to be anxious about. He would slowly discover the truth, slowly pry for information, and slowly look for opportunities. In the process, he would slowly deduce how to split the sword light of the other 6 flying swords. He knew very well that although the Big Dipper was like a fish in water in the current stellar pill, it did not mean that the Big Dipper could do everything. If he became a nascent soul, would he still have such ability? Would there be other changes? He had to find a suitable path for himself to split the sword light and not rely on a gift from the heavens. The days became peaceful, and the neighbors began to accept such a small restaurant. The fees were very low, but they did not know how capable this young master was. It was just like the secondary schools in his previous life, where the ranking and fees were determined by the percentage of students who were admitted to another school. Here, there were no imperial examinations. Cultivation was the only thing that mattered. The parents lived frugally so that their children could one day stand out among their peers. If the success rate of spiritual communication was higher, there would never be a shortage of students. Lu Xiaoyi's small restaurant was newly opened. It was not famous, and there were no practical results. Even if the fees were low, no one would be willing to send their children here. If the master was not capable, saving money was a small matter, but delaying the children's youth would be a lifelong problem. Lu Xiaoyi put on a look of someone willing to take the bait. It was a good opportunity for him to familiarize himself with the surrounding environment, such as the pub, market, shops, entertainment, and the family structure of the neighbors. You're tuning into the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.